live. Unfortunately, I was not able to do last Wednesday's tarot live because I forgot what day it is. That happens to me sometimes. Anyways, so I like to start the day, I like to start the session off with a couple announcements about what's going on business-wise as we are just coming off of my most recent Kickstarter for the Children of Litha Tarot. Sorry, the Children of Ostara Tarot, which is the sister or companion deck to the Children of Litha, which was the first tarot deck I ever made. So there's a lot to do about that. So officially now I have shipped out all of the orders for the Children of Ostara Tarot asterisks, with the only exception being those who ordered a wooden apothecary box or deck box. Wooden apothecary box or a wooden altar box. So again, those are the one deck boxes with the herbs or the two deck boxes with the herbs and spices and things. Those are the only Kickstarter rewards that have not been shipped yet. The reason being, well, some of them have been shipped, but many of them have not, and it's because we can only ship as many as our craftsperson in the UK, Reginald Spleen on Instagram, Facebook, things like that. He is just one guy in England making all of these wooden boxes by hand, so we can only go as quickly as he is able to produce boxes. So, and I attempted to be very transparent about that up front in the campaign. I said, if you back or order for one of these wooden apothecary boxes, you will get your rewards, but please be patient because he's one guy in a workshop, so it takes him however long it's going to take him to do that. And this is definitely I think a lot more orders than he's used to receiving all at once, as is the case with Kickstarters. I mean, it's the same with me too. It's very overwhelming. So I do appreciate all of your patience and support as we wait for that. But other than that, all of the Kickstarter rewards have been sent out. So the only delays are with wooden apothecary items, wooden box items. There were some issues with the Canadian shippers because of with the Canadian backers because of a Canadian postal strike, but the postal strike has been resolved and we were able to ship all of those out. It may be delayed getting to you because of the fallback from that, but it is on its way. We have unfortunately had a couple of returns. Not too many, but so if you I don't know, if you haven't got, I mean, it's very unlikely that this is you. I think we've got like 3 returns and I think we've already reached out to 2 of them, so should be fine, but definitely check your email. Make sure nothing goes to spam or junk if you're missing your if you haven't gotten your rewards yet, or if you haven't gotten shipping confirmation notices. Because sometimes those messages can go to spam or junk. And so we try to reach out to people if we have shipping issues, and sometimes we need like more information or whatever for the carriers. So please do check that. But yeah, so far so good. All of them are sent out and very few have been returned back to us, which is awesome. Yeah, so that Kickstarter is pretty much done. We're now selling the Children of Ostara Gold and Black editions on my site. Full stop. So your orders will go out on time and everything. Although I have to take out the little disclaimer that says we're backed up, but we're no longer backed up. So that's great. Yeah. So hello everybody, thank you for coming. So happy you're here with me. I was kind of sad I missed my last live, but things were really hectic on the home front, so I just totally forgot space-time existed. Anyway, so if you guys have a preference for which deck to use, I would love to get started with that. Although I do think that I will be able to have some time at the end to do some live tarot readings for those of you who are interested, which is very exciting because I very rarely do that kind of a thing. But I'm going to go to Pagan Pride Festival this year, August 4th in Eugene, Oregon. And I like to do live readings there for people. I do like $5 5-minute tarot readings just to, get back into it. Because since I've been making tarot decks, I very rarely get to do readings for like other people, besides myself and the occasional close family or friend or something like that. It's a very different experience, I think, when you read for people that you've never met before. It's very interesting. So I kind of want to get like some practice before the event because the last time I did that was last Pagan Pride Festival, so last August. So it's been like a full year basically. Oh my God, the year has flown so fast. It just keeps, what is it? Years start coming and then they don't stop coming, huh? It's very true. Anyway, so we got some comments here from our good friend Eddie. Let's see. Was wondering if you have used cinnabar in your witchery practices. Fascinating crystal, my favorite. Kind of want to make a mala made from it. Oh, interesting. I haven't used it in my magical practice, but I have seen it around, and I think I have a piece of it somewhere. It is very interesting for sure. I don't know if they make beads out of that, because I think my understanding is it's a little bit brittle, isn't it? Although they make beads out of apatite, which is also a very brittle stone, so it's possible that it's out there, but I haven't seen any. But I would love to make a custom mala for you if you're interested. So you can email me at xiahunt@gmail.com. Also, I have a Patreon tier where it's a custom mala per month. And I do them intuitively. No one signed up for that tier yet. It's a pretty high ticket item, and I wasn't really expecting anybody to sign up for that. But I thought if people were interested in getting like a nice high end subscription kind of a thing, it would be a nice excuse to make more malas. And I love making them, they're so much fun to make. So you could always sign up for that for a month and then talk to me about which one you wanted, and then that could be that. And then just, cancel it after the month or whatever. That's one way to do it. But anyway, so yeah, Litha or one of each. Nice. Okay, actually, it's nice that you say that because my inclination was actually to use both Litha and Ostara in tandem. So that's you and I are on the same wavelength. So I think that would be fun to do. And let's see, let me get my ducks in a row here. My amethyst amala arrived in Scotland yesterday. It's so beautiful. Oh, yay. Thank you so much for your support. And I'm really glad it got to you safely. I'm always like so paranoid about shipping things. I mean, it's part of the business, right? You can't exactly get something from one area to another without the post. And I deeply appreciate the postal service, don't get me wrong. But a lot can go sideways, and it's always kind of a little small miracle when everything works out okay. I mean, for the most part, it generally does. Usually things get to customers and it's just like a little bit delayed, or sometimes they'll send the message that it's delivered before it's delivered and then it comes like the next day. But it's always very stressful for me, and I'm sure for customers too, to like have something go wrong and then be like, help, help. And I'm like, I don't know. I don't have any more information on the shipping than you do. I just have the tracking number, same as you. So then we have to call the post, and that is a nightmare. Calling people at the postal office. Oh my God. Oh gods, have mercy, right? It's just very, very tedious. Oh, and just in case any of you are interested, so it is Mercury's day, Jupiter's hour, which is very exciting, a good time for knowledge and increasing knowledge, spirituality, wisdom, things of that nature. So yeah, let's see. Is that all my announcements? I think so. Yes, so we have the wooden wheel of the years, the mats, the keychains, the pins, then both tarot decks, the Children of Ostara Black and Gold Edition, now officially available at xiahunt.com. And I think the decks are on my Etsy as well, but I do generally prefer people use my website because there are lower fees, so it's better for everybody. But there you have it. Some people like Etsy's format better, so I have both. Oh, and I'm so excited about my Patreon reward spell jar tier, because the spell jars this month are very exciting. They're for passion and motivation, or perseverance and motivation. Well, really, it's like passion, motivation, and perseverance. They all kind of go together, right? But I'll just show you guys a little preview because I love the way they came out. So first of all, we've got rosemary for freshness. One of the meanings of rosemary is literally like to revitalize or kind of rekindle the sparks of passion. It's a really good refresh herb. It has natural antibacterial properties, which also symbolically means that it's good for protection and purification, right? So it's good for a fresh start and to see things with clean eyes. We've also got some amaranth flowers. Amaranth means unending or unfading, eternal. So eternal motivation. Oh my gosh, I cannot speak today. It's also ruled by Mars because it's bright red and it never fades its red. So it's really nice. We've got some black salt as a purifying base and a bunch of gemstones and some other herbs besides. So I don't know if you can like tell exactly, but I just love the way they look because the rosemary sprigs stand upright, and then there's like the amaranth down here and all the chips. So they make like a little terrarium kind of look. Anyway, so I'm very excited. So if you guys are signed up for my Patreon tier, Patron of the Craft, you get a spell jar every month. And it's a new spell jar. I elect astrological dates to do them that are auspicious. I always make sure that the moon, at the very least, that the moon is not afflicted, making an aspect to a malefic, essentially, is what that means. And usually I also try to make sure the moon is not in her exile, in her exile or her fall. However, there are certain kind of vibes where that might be beneficial. For example, the moon is considered to be in fall. Sorry, I was going to say the moon it's in fall in Scorpio, but it's considered to be in a, what's the word? In detriment or in exile in Capricorn, because it is domicile in the, Oh my gosh, why am I like losing my words right now? The moon's domicile is Cancer. The opposite of Cancer is Capricorn. And so the domicile of Cancer is like at home in Cancer, right? That's like where it has the most power, the most liberation and freedom to fulfill its many gifts on Earth. And then the opposite sign is the farthest away from home that planet is. And so it's generally considered to be the least powerful. However, if you're trying to do a spell that requires you to set aside comfort in favor of, say, pursuing an ambition, or if you're trying to set aside like the need for that kind of lunar things, or to be less emotional, for example, then actually having a moon in Capricorn might be a good election for that, because Capricorn moons tend to be much more practical than emotional, and are able to set aside personal desires and personal comforts for the sake of their greater ambition, or for building more secure foundational structures. And today was really interesting, not today, but when I made the spell jar a couple days ago, the moon was in Capricorn, but it was making no ill aspects to a hard planet like a malefic like Saturn or Mars. It was being ruled by Saturn in Capricorn, but Saturn was conjunct and exalted Venus. So I really felt like this is a good moon for setting aside, or it was a good moon, not anymore. Let me check. I can tell you right now where the moon is currently. Let's see here. The moon is in Aquarius now, and it's a new moon. It's about 2 degrees away from the sun. Oh, and Mercury is under the beams quite a bit as well, so that's fun. It'll be, anyway, sorry, and it's like all next to Pluto. We've got Pluto, Mercury, the sun, and the moon all together in Aquarius, so it's gonna be a time for Aquarius risings, I think, right now. Anyway, lots of stuff going on in Aquarius at this moment. But at any rate, when I was doing the spell jar, right, it's very interesting because so Saturn being co-present and, conjunct and exalted Venus means that Venus has a lot of power in the sign of Pisces, whereas Saturn is kind of misplaced in the sign of Pisces a bit. Pisces is ruled by Jupiter. Jupiter being the greater benefic is about like expansion and oneness, unification through belief and community, and like coming together and, kind of dissolving boundaries from media. It's very empathetic sign, Pisces, very emotional, very like open. Everybody has like this energetic semi-permeable membrane, right? Where, some stuff comes in, some stuff goes out. It's like responsible for intuition and energetic exchanges and things like that. Pisces have like the most permeable of the semi-permeable membrane for that kind of thing. Like they just let everything in, sometimes to their detriment and sometimes to their benefit, depending on what's going on. Because they do have a tendency, people with a lot of Pisces placements can like pick up on the room, but of course then the vibes really affect you, right? So if everybody's having a bad time, then you're going to have a bad time, and it becomes more difficult to have those psychic barriers to protect yourself and to kind of hold space for what's going on, like other people's experiences, and also not be dominated by them or overcome by them, or allowing that to really rule you. So that's something that people with a lot of Pisces placements have to work on. But anyway, the point is, Venus does very, very well in Pisces. I think it has a tendency to hinder her more self-indulgent, more selfish tendencies, while still maintaining that pleasure and that experience of beauty and that universal kind of abundance. So Venus loves being in Pisces. I mean, I always kind of considered it like, imagine feeling like you're totally beautiful and totally one with nature, and you're just kind of like laying on your back floating in the ocean or something. It's like a perfect temperature. That's how I picture Venus exalted in Pisces. I always visualize Pisces as an ocean. So ocean or fish, fish in the ocean. So that's how I pick. But Saturn, though, he's very rigid. He's very rigid, and he wants rules and restrictions and boundaries, and he says no, and he wants to like make everything, structural and make it make sense and stand the test of time. And if it's not practical, usable in the material, he's like, well, what use is it, right? Saturn is a very grim taskmaster, and particularly Saturn's expression in Capricorn is very much about structures that exist, the reality, the limitations of material reality. And so I feel like in Pisces, Saturn is not necessarily in fall or detriment, but it's kind of an ill-suited sign for him. It's like trying to build like construction zones underneath the ocean, or trying to like sort different oceanic, make boundaries in the ocean where everything is already one all the time. It's not something that really works very well. On the other hand, Saturn has a decan in Pisces. For those of you who don't know, I'm very much into decans. And actually, let me pull out my decan wheel, because I always forget to bring it beforehand. But Yeah, so Saturn has a decan in Pisces, which is to say Saturn has a place in Pisces. And it's very interesting because the Saturn decan of Pisces corresponds to the 8 of, we said Litha, right? And I was just going to use Ostara as the side. I believe that was what we said. So let me just go ahead and pull out really quick since we're talking about it and y'all are here for tarot, not necessarily astrology, although by this point you're probably here for both because I tend to integrate them quite a bit. By the way, just for the record, I started with tarot. I got into astrology through tarot because the Rider-Waite-Smith decks are very much ingrained with those correspondences, and they act as a really awesome key for further exploration of other esoteric topics and studies, astrology definitely being one of them. And so I began learning astrology through tarot. And so that's the lens that I always bring to it. And astrology and tarot are different systems, and they speak to different needs. Astrology is a giant, ever working clock in the heavens. You know, that's unchangeable. It's aloof. It's far away. It's patterns. It's weather, right? You can look at it and you can divine with it. You can figure out what it's good for, but you can't really change it. And it's not really. It affects you, but it's not necessarily. Well, I shouldn't even say that because astrology gets can get crazy much into you and who you are, and you know, because you're part of the cosmic weather, right? But anyway, I guess what I'm trying to say is that tarot can be a lot more personal and reactive and relative and speak to it. I find in my experience, tarot is really good at speaking to where you have free will, and astrology is really good at speaking to where you are fated. And so together they make this really beautiful system where, you know, you can kind of define the context through astrology and see like what's going to happen, what's the vibe of what's going to happen. And then when you use tarot, you can say, okay, so given these constraints, you know, what are my options here? What does this look like for me personally? And I find that they really support and help each other a lot in that way. So they really just work beautifully together, in my opinion. So now that I'm always like everyone, and anyone who says differently needs to come to terms with some truths. I am always learning. I'm always encountering new information and trying to, contextualize and recontextualize about where that puts me, where that puts my understanding of things. And so I definitely didn't always have that astrological information at hand. But since I have been furthering my studies in that area, I find it to be just more and more and more spectacularly wondrous and useful and amazing. And so if you haven't already, I do highly recommend integrating astrology into your tarot practice or vice versa, because they really are just such beautifully complementary systems. And I think that we can get a lot out of both. So that's my 2 cents on the matter. But at any rate, these are both the 8 of Cups. What I was saying before was that Saturn, this corresponds to the Saturn ruled decan of Pisces. Sorry, I pointed at Jupiter initially. I was just pointing at Pisces, but just to be clear, this is the glyph for Saturn, okay? In case anyone doesn't know that. I'm sure most of you do, but you never know who's watching. Anyway, so the Saturn decan of Pisces, and just to be clear, each zodiac sign is a total of 30 degrees, and they all have a planetary ruler. Pisces is ruled overall by Jupiter. That's its big ruler. But every 10 degrees is broken up into, there's three sections of 10 degrees each. Those are called the decans, deca as in 10, and each of those 10 degrees is given a different planetary kind of sub-ruler according to the Chaldean order, which goes in order of planetary speed as perceived from our perspective on Earth. So anyway, there are a couple different decan systems. There's like a triplicity system and et cetera, et cetera. I definitely use the old Hellenistic Chaldean order. That's my favorite. I like it a lot. I find its descriptive power to be very apt. And if you look at old astrological or magical texts, such as the Picatrix and things like that, or Ibn Ezra's Beginning of Wisdom, or what's that other one I'm always reading? I'm always referencing, I should say, Agrippa. Or if you read the Agrippa's occult philosophy, it tends to use the Chaldean decans. So anyway, so those are the systems that I use. That's a system that's on this beautiful decan wheel, which is handmade and painted by Pandora Witch Shop specifically for Xia Hunt. So you can buy this particular wheel with the Children of the Wheel wreath design and the decans, and having it go in the astrologer's order, which is to say counterclockwise as opposed to clockwise. If you want that version, you can get it from my site, xiahunt.com. But if you want just a general cool wheel of the year that doesn't have the decans, that goes in clockwise order, that is a more I don't know, more like what you might see as a decorative tool, then Pandora Witch Shop has a ton of different designs, and you should definitely check them out. They are wonderful, beautiful people, and they do really awesome work. So depending on what you want. So it's very common for, and I was actually researching this more because somebody asked me and I didn't know the exact reason why, but you might have seen zodiacal wheels both going clockwise and counterclockwise. And you might wonder why that is. And at first I thought, well, this is just ignorance on the part of the illustrator, right? Because I also, before, when I was getting into astrology, but I wasn't as well versed in it as I am now, saw many counterclockwise charts and kind of assumed that was how one did them. Because, in the West, particularly, the so-called West, and the so-called Western influenced regions of the world, it's very common to see things left from right and clockwise. Those are the orders that we tend to read things. But when you look at, so there's a lot of astrological charts and wheels of the year that go clockwise. However, when you look at an actual astrology chart, or when you go to an astrologer, when you look at your apps, like Ephemeris or Astrology Master, even Horos, any app that shows you an actual chart, you'll see that they go counterclockwise. And that's because the planets, that's how we track the planets, moving counterclockwise. And so even though the rising wheel goes clockwise, the planets go counterclockwise. And so you'll, in those apps, you'll see it with Aries on the lower left. This would be the assumed default rising. Of course, your actual rising depends on, the moment the rising was, oh my gosh, the constellation rising over the horizon on your exact time of birth. It changes about every 2 hours. So it's, that's the most changeable one. Anyway. So it starts with Aries, and then it goes down to Taurus, then Gemini, then Cancer, counterclockwise motion. That's how astrologers would read a chart. But I posted it in my astrology forum because I'm like, hey, why are there so many depictions of the zodiacal wheel going clockwise if pretty much every astrologer reads it going counterclockwise? And I got really interesting results. A lot of people were saying, oh yeah, it's just mistakes. It's just like cheap graphics or whatever. But one person was very interesting because they were talking about, well, it depends if it's serving as a map or a clock or, depending on its purpose. Because and I forget the specifics, but they were basically saying, like, if you're using it as a map, then it does appear to go in a clockwise motion if you looked at the sky every night. However, if you're using it as a clock, then it's counterclockwise because that's how we track the planets going through the different signs. And so I guess it turns out that there is valid precedent for counterclockwise and clockwise depending on its function, at least according to that user. So I thought that's kind of that's interesting because you do see so many counterclockwise and clockwise depictions. And so, if it's one or two, I can see it totally being a case of illustrator being, commissioned by somebody who doesn't necessarily use astrology or it doesn't read astrology, but for say like a magazine column or some kind of like visual or just aesthetic or like on a notebook or something. And they're like, oh yeah, okay, the zodiac signs, they go in this order, and then just assume counterclockwise, they draw it that way. And then when other illustrators look for reference, they continue to copy that, essentially incorrect reference. I totally could see a situation like that. And with the internet, having that misinformation spread even faster and be more widespread. And there's always so many cheap graphics being now generated by AI, but also even before then, just kind of being photoshopped together based off of other people's things. So I could see that definitely being the case. And I think in some instances, that still probably is. But because there was so much of it out there, like so many of the charts, if you just Googled them, show them going clockwise. So I thought, okay, this is probably not just a mistake, right? If so many people are doing it, there's probably something going on here. I mean, even Alphonse Mucha, my favorite artist, he does a piece where there's a zodiac wheel in the background of this really beautiful woman. And he also does the clockwise one. And I know that Mucha was interested, particularly later in his life, in esoteric philosophy and mysticism. And so I feel like it's unlikely that he would have never encountered an actual astrological chart, which since the Hellenistic times and beyond have been made in counterclockwise order. So it seems very unlikely. So I don't know. So I thought, okay, well, maybe there's something to it. And apparently there might be. But anyway, for the most part, if you get an astrological reading, or if you wanted to track your decans, or if you wanted to match up your chart to the wheel, we want it going counterclockwise. So that's important. Anyway. huge tangent aside, but just to show you, right, like I'm always learning. You know, when I first started, I made an astrology mat that was going clockwise because that was what I saw. Then I made another one. My most recent radiant astrology mat is going counterclockwise because I wanted to include the decans, and I wanted to be able to kind of use it as an astrological map so you could track your transits on the mat if you wanted, and things like that. And so it's interesting. And then you see a lot of pagan sabbats going the other way because they're not necessarily linking it to the zodiac. And the Hellenistic zodiac is pinned to the solstices and the equinoxes. So it starts at Aries because Aries is around the Ostara, the spring equinox, right? So the beginning and renewal of life and stuff, and it's pinned to the to Yule, right, to the winter solstice, and to Litha, and to Mabon and Ostara. Those that's what kind of pinned the zodiacal I don't know, movements, right? Is those periods of time from the perspective of Earth. So anyway, so I think it made intuitive sense to me to kind of combine them and use them together. But yeah, so I don't know. Interesting food for thought, I guess. It's a big world out there. Lots of interpretations for lots of reasons. Anywho, so as I was saying, let's see. As someone who lives in the southern hemisphere, I've always struggled with that part. Yes. And as somebody who really struggles to conceptualize space and time as literal things in the northern hemisphere, I always also struggle with that part. You know, when people talk to me about things going the opposite direction in the southern hemisphere, I'm like so confused. It boggles my mind. It's very cool if you think about it, but it's also, for me personally, very confusing. But yes, another great example of how everything is relative. Even things like clockwise and counterclockwise. So yeah, it's all very confusing, but I guess the short of the long and short of it, the short of it is it's a matter of not only preference, but apparently also function and what you're trying to depict. And I suppose there's nothing really wrong with showing a clockwise zodiacal order if it's just for aesthetic purposes, particularly. I mean, because, you know, if you're learning the order, that's kind of how people tend to visualize things. But I don't know, now that I know more about astrology, I definitely think that I prefer it going counterclockwise, because if you look at an astrology app, that's what you're going to see. If you get your chart read by an astrologer, that's what they're going to use. So I do find it to be more helpful, but particularly when you look at pagan wheels that only have only have this or only have the zodiac, it's very common to see the pagan sabbats going clockwise. And real astrological charts do kind of account for both motions because, you know, anyway. So it's all very confusing. That's my least favorite part of astrology is, by the way, is trying to map on these like very real, I really love the symbolical weaving of narratives and like finding patterns and you know, and figuring out like what that means and that kind of stuff. I love the beautiful aesthetics that come from it, not just in modern, it's actually, I would say least of all the modern aesthetics, but going far back into antiquity, you see these beautiful depictions of all these symbolic meanings. I just love how everything's connected and how it speaks to above and below phenomena, you know, within and without. Love all of that stuff. But you know how long it took me to realize that, like, for example, every full moon is a moon sun opposition, because for the moon to be full, the sun has to be opposite the moon so that it gets the full light. It's reflecting that full light. And so then every moon sun conjunction in a chart is a new moon, right? Because they're on top of each other conjunct, and the moon therefore is not reflecting back that light. Anyway, it's very interesting. It's trying to depict literal celestial phenomenon in a two-dimensional chart. And so sometimes translating the two-dimensional to the three-dimensional is challenging when you only kind of learn to look at it in one way. Anyway, I just learned that in my in Austin Kopic's Year 1 astrology course, because I think he's very good at bridging the gap and kind of helping you to see how these things are real and literal and also symbolic, right? But not forgetting the real literal part of things. Like, you know, for example, the different like Sidonic cycles of the planets and like how much light one gets or how much speed it appears that one has, and how those literal phenomenon are also responsible for the planetary meanings, and like how they act in the sky is where their symbolism derives. It's very interesting, like how Venus and Mercury have very reliable motions in the heavens, and they make these beautiful patterns, but Mars doesn't, is like totally erratic and makes like harsh patterns that aren't really like that, you know, they don't form any nice geometric shape. And so that's because Mars is disruptive, right? That's where it gets its sort of meanings, right? Because it's disruptive and it's temperamental, and when it's far away from the sun, it shines the brightest and it moves the fastest. So it's like a very aggressive, red star in the sky from our perspective on Earth. I know it's a planet, but the ancients, by the way, used the term planet as like meaning traveling star, and they often would use star and planet interchangeably. And since they made the category before we did, it's kind of interesting now that we've very much like refined it to arbitrary standards. But at any rate, Mars is a very red, aggressive, erratically moving star in a lot of cases, when you're looking at it. And so that's why it gets the symbolic meaning of being like disruptive and being confrontational and aggressive. So it's very interesting to kind of bridge those. So if you're able to take Austin's course, I really recommend it. I came in thinking I knew a fair amount about astrology, but like I said, you're always learning new things. And that's one benefit of finding a really good teacher who you trust to give you good information. Because good information, well, it's just as prevalent as bad information, I'm afraid. And it can be very difficult to differentiate the two, especially when you're starting out. So, and I think Chris Brennan also has an astrology class, and I listen to his podcast, and Chris Brennan is like amazing. He also wrote the book, he literally wrote the book on Hellenistic astrology, which I have, and it's very good. So if you're interested in exploring that, not sponsored, just a fan, it's just good reference for you if you're interested in Hellenistic whole sign astrology. Anyway, as I've been trying to say, so the Saturn sub-rule decan of Pisces is very interesting because while Pisces is open and infinite and spiritual, Saturn is about limitations. And so on one hand, we're looking at the limitations of the spiritual, right? Saturn is in Pisces right now and will be until, I can actually find this information for you right now because I have my software pulled up. And Saturn is going out of Pisces into Aries this year. I forget exactly when, so let me look. Let's see here. We have, so Neptune goes into Aries first, and then we have, where are you? Okay, there's Saturn in Aries. So go back, when does it happen? Go back. Okay, so it's in that month. Sorry, 1 second, I'm buffering. Here we go, 7 days. Okay, here we go. We're going to limit it now to 1 day. Go back. There we go. Okay, so May 24th, 2025. On the 25th, it will be in Aries. So May 24th is the last day that Saturn will be in Pisces. So Saturn's a slow mover. He's been in Pisces for a minute. But anyway, so on the one hand, I think you might notice globally, you remember before Saturn went into Pisces, which I guess I should tell you that for context too. But I definitely know, here, let me go back to a 2020 chart. Yeah, okay. So 2020, Saturn was domicile in Aquarius, and you remember that was that whole Saturn-Jupiter conjunction where they switched from being an earth sign into an air sign. It coincided with a bunch of plague, namely COVID, and everybody was like trapped, refined indoors, which is very Saturn to be trapped inside your box of what is the term? Self-induced restriction and confinement in your little structured societal box. And then in Aquarius, because it was very frustrating, nobody wanted to be in the box, right? But anyway, and scary also. But the point is, though, what I'm trying to say is that before Saturn went into Pisces, you remember people used to say like, oh, we're all in this together, and like thoughts and prayers, and we're really, we're really experiencing this moment of unification and oneness. And this is because Neptune is domicile in Pisces. Everybody's a mystic. Everybody's a spiritualist. Everybody's feels one with everybody else. And then Saturn goes into Pisces, and it's, and that's been a while past COVID. And people are like, I think there's a limit on how much thoughts and prayers actually means, right? I think there's a limit on how much that sentiment actually can do for another person. And then it starts becoming corruptive. And then it's just like a cheap thing we throw out when we don't want to get our hands dirty and actually engage in communal aid. We don't want to actually help each other. We don't actually help our neighbors or our sisters and siblings. We just want to say, oh, thoughts and prayers, and throw it out. It's like what billionaires say to poor people as their houses are burning down, right? And so it became very obvious when Saturn, I think, started moving into Pisces, like, oh, there are restrictions and limitations on this kind of spiritual oneness and unification and this kind of like gentle thought. On the one hand, those things have power and they're very useful, and we saw that also with when Saturn was not in Pisces. People were really exploring magic and quantum physics, and they were really exploring like the extent to which their will and their personal magic and intention could influence themselves, their lives, and their surroundings. We saw a big uptick in that. And then now, as we're going on, and Saturn, fast forward to today, Saturn is in Pisces, and we're realizing, there is a limit to how much our will alone can affect change. At some point, we have to actually do the hard work. And Saturn is very much about doing the hard work. Saturn is a grim taskmaster, and if you try to cut corners, Saturn cuts you down. That's the issue. That's what Saturn does. Saturn says no. Saturn is a restriction, a limitation, a boundary, a corruption, an erosion. And so when you have these like beautiful Piscean, Jupiterian waters that buoy and uplift everybody, and it's, oneness and unification and mysticism and spirituality, and Saturn goes into there. Saturn in his role as a malefic, which, by the way, no shade on malefics. They do necessary things and they do have virtues. One of Saturn's virtue is discipline and hard work and patience. So Saturn brings very good things to the table, but he is also a malefic. And when he goes into a sign, one of the symptoms, the things that you see, is Saturn corrupting the significations of that sign. Or, if you like, showing you where there are areas of corruption that need to be addressed. And so when Saturn went into Pisces, we started seeing spiritual corruption. And we started seeing people just, spiritual bypassing, and then getting really upset about it and being like, hey, this isn't right. Like, this isn't what you're supposed to be, what one should be using spirituality for. It's not to neglect and marginalize and abuse people. It's supposed to uplift people, right? It's supposed to help people. And Saturn loves to show you where your limits are, right? And there's only so many times you can hear thoughts and prayers before you start thinking that's maybe a bit patronizing. That's a little bit condescending, right? It's like, well, why don't you actually get here and, give aid, right? It's hard to listen to like an oligarchy of billionaires say thoughts and prayers when your family is starving and you have like, I don't know, the freezing cold winter storms in Texas and the LA fires and all of these different, global confrontations, quote unquote, let's say, genocide. When you have all of this stuff going on and you see your oligarchy, billionaire, corporate elite rulers saying, oh, thoughts and prayers, that starts feeling really corruptive, and it starts feeling really old. It gets old really fast because it's like, oh, how about instead of sending thoughts and prayers, you send money, or you send aid, or you send food, or you build shelter, right? We want Saturnian structures that are strong and enduring and mean something in the material reality that we have to live in, at least for the time being of our lives. Our personal egoic lifetimes in this moment, right? I don't know, whatever you think goes on, whatever you think happens afterwards, if there's multiple lives or not, whatever, the reality that we have to contend with right now. So Saturn shows us those limitations. On the other hand, Saturn also, in Pisces in particular, loves to show kind of the structures of the hidden, of the unseen, of the mystical. Many magical traditions have structure, right? They have rigorous, initiations that you have to pass. A pass or fail is a Saturnian thing, so Saturn's place in Pisces. They oftentimes have hierarchies. They have people in positions of control. That, again, is very Saturnian, being an authority that is controlling and restrictive. And they are restrictive, right? Because if you subscribe to one philosophical religious belief very strongly, chances are we're going to restrict the influence of other spiritual philosophical beliefs. So there is a place for Saturn in this realm of Pisces. If you think of Pisces as being this huge spiritual ocean, well, eventually there's a floor to that ocean. There's structure there somewhere. And so Saturn in Pisces does tend to struggle. However, it also gropes for the structural foundations of these ethereal, deep, and mysterious waters of spirituality, of unification, of oneness, of psyche, of soul. Saturn looks for the limits and the structures that contain that water. And so there's, when we see the Saturn decan of Pisces, particularly as reflected in the Eight of Cups, we see there's this kind of sad letting go, drifting, loneliness that happens. Oftentimes, if you just hear, tarot keyword takeaway kind of stuff, you'll hear the Eight of Cups be associated with Oh, letting go, moving on, leaving material baubles and trinkets behind as you search for the spiritual, as you search for something beyond the material, something that's internal, eternal and internal, right? Something that cannot be taken away from you. This is something that Saturn, in my experience, will show again and again and again. One of Saturn's greatest lessons is that anything that you can be given, anything that you can have, can be taken away from you. It can be eroded, it can be destroyed. Only things that are deep ingrained within you can always be yours, are truly eternal to you in your lifetime. You know, things like your love, things that the people that you love, the connections that you share, right? Those people can be taken away, but the love you have for them cannot. You are the one that gets sole control over that. And yeah, you know, things influence your mind or whatever, but like that's you, right? Your soul, your spirit, your morals and values. You know, those things can change and they can be tested, but they only are taken away if you give them away, if you allow them to be taken away. Like your faith, right? Your faith cannot be taken from you. It can be, you can abandon it. It can, you know, you can leave it behind. You can decide you don't want it anymore, but that's you, right? No one else can take it away from you. So the Saturn ruled decan of Pisces tends to illuminate these sensations, these experiences. The Eight of Cups, therefore, compels us to discard false idols, false friendships, false tokens, and materialism, anything that is distracting from that true core sense of universal oneness, that divine spark within us, these things that are true to our core, right, that we hold with us, that cannot be taken away from us no matter what happens. That is what Saturn, ruled decan of Pisces, is searching for, right? Is groping for the structure beneath all of those things, the skeleton that you hang your faith upon, right? What are the pillars of your faith, the pillars of your emotional, psychic foundations, and what does that mean, right? And exploring that and being willing to let go of anything that is hindering or confusing or blurring those boundaries and those lines, you know, for malefic or ill purpose. So Saturn's decan of Pisces, or the Eight of Cups, is kind of one of my favorite cards because it is so complex and emotional, and it's very much about, you know, leaving behind, like one. Okay, and here's the thing too, it's an 8 card, right? 8 is accumulation, manifestation, power, energy. It's you're really, and in Pythagorean numerology, another system utilized in the Rider-Waite-Smith tarot decks, and I would say in, I don't know, probably in all tarot decks. The issue is I'm going to say this all the time until my face goes blue. But Arthur Waite and Pamela Pixie Smith, the writer and illustrator of the Rider-Waite-Smith tarot deck, belonged to the esoteric group, the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. For better or for worse, they were primarily Victorian society, interested in Hellenistic mysticism, things that combined, you know, and that was an age of Hermeticism. Basically comes out of Alexandrian, Egyptian kind of philosophies. The city of Alexandria, the library for which I'm named after, by the way, was at that time, in the time of the ancients, a huge wellspring of wisdom and spiritual cultural blending. So you had influences from Greek and Roman philosophies and ideologies, from different Arabic kind of thoughts and philosophies, from Christian and Jewish philosophies and mysticisms, from Egyptian, obviously, philosophies and mysticisms, even Indian, and all of these different kind of things all coalescing and coming together to create sort of like a melting pot of philosophy, of religion, of practice, of spell work, of magic. And so generally blanket term, that kind of vibe, that Hellenistic influenced Egypt is Hermetic, right? When people talk about like Hermetic mysticism or wisdom, they're talking about things that come out of that time period for the most part. Anyway, they were very, very interested in that. And so they sought to, when they made the tarot deck, they changed some things from the tarot that existed before then, which was primarily used as a card game, which is the ones that the Marseilles tarot decks are based off of. Apologies if I'm mispronouncing that. Not good at pronouncing things. Anyway, but those otherwise known as pip decks, right? Decks that only have the cards, only have these suits, and do not have illustrated minors at all. And this is something that so bugged me. When I first did the Children of Litha, people were like, oh, it's kind of a pip deck. And I'm like, bitch, no, it's not. It's not a pip deck. It is not a pip deck, because look at this. What is this? An illustration. Anyway, and it's an illustration that has to do with the card meaning. They say that because all of these cups are the same, but in the Rider-Waite-Smith deck, all of her cups are the same too, guys. They're just not as graphic. But anyway, this is not a pip deck. It doesn't get called that anymore. And I think that like colloquially terms shift. A pip deck does truly just mean like a playing card deck where if this was the 8 of Cups, it would show only 8 cups, maybe a geometric design. But it could also just very easily be only 8 cups. Next time I'll have one. I have a bunch of pip decks, but I don't keep my tarot collection in my office. I keep it in my living room. But anyway, I'll show you guys what a true pip deck is. But the point is, they don't have illustrations that have that have, generally speaking, a ton of meaning about what the card is meant to represent. You're supposed to go mostly off of numerology, which is totally valid. There's nothing wrong with pip decks, by the way. I just got mad because people were calling mine a pip deck, and it's not. It's not designed to be that way. Pip decks at most will have like intricate geometric drawings in the back. They won't have illustrations of like figures or animals or whatever. They might have like I don't know, like they might have like a fish artfully ingrained in the geometric patterning, like kind of how illuminated manuscripts, like the Book of Kells, for example, would have like decorative elements. And those decorative elements can be symbolic. And so it's not to say that with every Marcel Styles deck, you're going to have like no visual cues for what that card means. That's not necessarily the case. But it's not like a figure doing something that gives the meaning, right? Anyway, my point is why I differentiate the Rider-Waite-Smith tradition and also the Thoth tradition. If you're into that, Aleister Crowley was a very problematic figure, even by that time period standards. So let's just leave it at that. But he also was a member of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, as were just like a bunch of fucking people. Like the poet Yeats was a member of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. There's a bunch of people, but like big names that you would recognize. Carl Jung, well, I don't know if he was a member official, but he was very interested in Hermetic esoteric literature and mysticism and things like that, which are very evident influences in his Red Book, if you're interested in looking at that, or if you're interested in Jungian psychology. Anyway, point is, that was the first time that they very specifically made a tarot for the purposes of like divination. They linked the minor arcana to the decans. They reordered some of the major cards so that it would correspond to the zodiac more clearly. They tweaked a lot of the imagery and the symbolism in those cards to correspond specifically to those zodiac signs. And so when you use a Rider-Waite-Smith based style deck, you are getting those astrological correspondences according to the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn ingrained in those things, even a lot of the time, even when the artist did not intend that outright. When you look up tarot reference, you're probably going to see the Rider-Waite-Smith tarot. And so, for example, every High Priestess card that has a moon by the High Priestess is using that influence, because the moon, High Priestess in the Rider-Waite-Smith system corresponds to the moon in astrology, and that's why that symbol is there. So they might not know it, but they're including all of these zodiacal cues, these zodiac symbolisms into their decks, because the Rider-Waite-Smith deck was such an influential deck. And it's such an influential deck because it works, because it's a beautiful amalgamation, a beautiful Frankenstein, as Austin Coppock says, of all these different kind of beliefs and systems and cues that go into it. So you can learn Pythagorean numerology, you can learn stuff about alchemy, you can learn stuff about different religions, you can learn stuff about astrology by really studying the cards in a Rider-Waite-Smith tarot deck, especially the original Rider-Waite-Smith tarot deck. But a lot of those clone decks took so many symbols from them that it's just as well, right? That you get it anyway. So it's very interested. Anywho, hashtag not a pip deck, exactly. It's not really a big deal. I have a lot of pip decks and I love pip decks. I think they're very interesting for other reasons. And particularly if you're mostly using numerology, it's very beneficial because you can't really cheat. You just have to like know what that number means. And so I think that in that way it can be an interesting kind of tool. There's a lot of room for projection for sure. There's less kind of keeping you in check because, and here's the thing too, like there are different styles of tarot reading. Some people read cards, some people read people. And so if you wanted to project things because you're getting some kind of vibe or something on the client, then a pip deck might be easier to do that with, because you don't have to be like, if this is good, why is the picture so sad? You know what I mean? But anyway, so first, it's a personal thing. Every reader is different. They're going to want to do things that are different. And I don't want to poo-poo that, because it's totally valid. But these are the systems that I prefer. So they're the ones that teacher knows, right? And not to be so presumptuous as to say I'm a teacher. I'm always a student, never a teacher. But anyway, I will share what I know if that's any use to anyone. So I do love the Eight of Cups because it very much shows this beautiful blending of the Saturnian need for truth and reality within this highly mystical, spiritual realm of Pisces. It's a very interesting go. And so when you see the Eight of Cups in a reading, oh, where I was getting with the numerology thing, oh, that's what I remember I was talking about. It's what led to this whole tangent. Oh, me and my tangents. I can't live without them. Anyway, what I was trying to say was that in Pythagorean numerology, you go from 1 to 9, the main digits, and that's it. And every other big digit is reduced by adding the 2 digits. So for example, 18 is actually 9 because 1 plus 8 equals 9. Look at me and my quick math. Anyway, and that's how you would do it, with the exception of some master numbers, which are 11, 22, 33, and I believe 44 also, but not beyond that. I believe it ends at 44 in Pythagorean numerology. It's either that or 33. I know 33 is included. I'm kind of blanking. I'm pretty sure it's 44 too, because there's some reason, and it ends up being like 78 is involved, and 78 is also like a sacred number, which is why there's 78 cards in a tarot deck. And I think it has something to do with, because if you add 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 plus 5 plus 6 plus 7 plus 8 plus 9, etc. I think it's something about that. But anyway, I don't want to distract myself. I don't want to distract myself too much. So the point is, all of these different numbers mean something. Pythagoras is most known for his theorem, right? A squared plus b squared equals c squared, but he was also a mystic and a spiritualist, and yes, an astrologer, because at that time, those categories of life were not different. Being a scientist was not different than being a spiritualist, a mystic, an alchemist, whatever, right? Those things could be very seamlessly blended. And there was no need to separate. So Pythagoras believed that in addition to numbers serving as literal markers for quantity, those quantities and those numbers, those symbols, had powers and indications and vibes in and of themselves. And that's the basis for numerology, is that everything that can be counted or can be turned into a numerical entity has the essence or quality of that number. So, little lesson on numerology for you. So because you only get to 1 to 9, by the time you get to 8, the numbers build a momentum. Do you know what I mean? 1 stands alone, is firm, commanding, authoritative. 2, now you have contradictions, debates, also agreement, accord, right? You have a relationship. And then 3, you have creation, right? Because the 2 equals a third, right? Because mama and daddy equals baby, so you get creation and life and exploration and blah, blah, blah. And then 4, you get stability, et cetera, whatever. By the time you get to 8, you're like full speed. This is the reason why the 8 of Wands, which is, the fire expression, fire being very fast, very warm, very, very lively, is such a quick card, right? It depicts insanely fast, like insights, deliveries, things flying at the speed of light, right? Huge leaps and bounds, going really fast. Anyway, the point is, with 8s, you have momentum behind you. You're almost done, but you're not quite manifest. So 8s have a lot of power, and also, little fun, the number 8 on its side is the infinity sign. So you have a lot of power, a lot of speed, a lot of experience, but you're not quite manifest. So you still have time to change things and to make a difference, to make a big impact, right? Versus 9, which is like you're pretty much done. By the time you get to 9s, it's like you're manifest. This is happening. It's in the material world. And then because of tarot, right? 10 is just seen as 1, but at a higher vibration. It's beginning another cycle, ending the old cycle. But in like pure Pythagorean numerology, they would reduce 10 to 1 again, and then and you also do keep in mind, right? You keep in mind how you get there. So the double digit number does count. Like 18 is different, has a different vibe when you get 9 through 18, has a different vibe than just 9 on its own, but they're both ultimately 9, right? So anyway, so it's very interesting and it's a fun system to use. The point is though, 8s are very powerful. And in the suit of water, where you have this kind of cold, ethereal, slower expression than fire, you have this infinite array around you, right? 8 is about infinities, about so much, about having so much power in that elemental domain. And by the time you get to 8, now we're saying, oh, look I've accumulated along the way all of these cups, right? All of these different, each cup is a relationship, is a trophy, is something that you feel some kind of way about, something that you have a relationship with. You've accumulated all of these, and you've gone, let's say you've accomplished all of your goals, you have your dream relationship, you have X, Y, and Z, and you should be so happy because look at this stack of baubles you've collected. But as Ariel says, right, you want more. You want to be a part of that world, right? It's not enough to have the trinket. It's not enough to have the job or the wife or the dog or the picket fence. Those things are tokens. They don't mean anything really when you get right down to it, right? Because what you wanted wasn't a trophy wife. What you wanted was to feel loved and respected and make a meaningful union and commitment with another person, with another soul for however long that lasts. You wanted a meaningful connection, right? You didn't really want a fancy car. You wanted respect, and you wanted to be seen as somebody who was worth something to your society. And you mistook the car for that feeling of recognition and success. And so when we get to the 8, we're saying, oh, we've come a long way. We've gained a lot of momentum. We've experienced so many emotional phenomena, and we're still unhappy. We're still not there. Whatever this is, it's not the end, right? And so 8 is asking, in this case, in the case of water, the spiritual, relational, emotional realm, is saying, okay, well, let's leave it then. We're off for something that we've experienced this, so we know it's not it. Let's go after what it is, right? And I would love to talk more about the 9 and 10, because what an interesting arc that is. What a wild ride all of these different suits are. But it's very interesting, right? Because when you get the 8 of Cups, it's not just like a breakup. It's not just moving on. It's not just letting go and releasing. It's releasing in favor of something that is real, that will withstand the test of time, that cannot be taken away from you because it is a part of you, right? It's really like, and in a relationship, yeah, this is like leaving the relationship you think you want because it's not actually fulfilling. You're not making a meaningful connection with someone that is like a part of your soul, right? That's not what's happening. What's happening is this is a relationship of convenience, or this is a relationship you want to love, but you don't, or, there's something distracting about it and it needs to be let go so that you can be unburdened and fulfill your truest expression of whatever it is that you're actually after, which ideally is seen in the 10 of Cups. However, asterisk, that decan is ruled by Mars, and I would love to talk to you about why that's more complicated than people think it is. But anyway, we're on the 8 right now, and it's not even a fair, I didn't even shuffle. I just drew the card. So I cheated, but for whatever reason, I don't even remember why I wanted to talk about the 8 of Cups. I guess it's just that's kind of vibe today. Oh, and I got some comments. So let's see what we got. Comments. Thank you for the Rex. You're welcome. If you ever get your hands on an actual physical copy of Austin Coppock's 36 Faces, buy it. I mean, there's like one on eBay for like $700 or maybe even more now, I think. His first edition is out of print, and he's been working on a second edition. He's still working on it, but it's not out yet. So hopefully that comes out soon. I'm going to buy like 5 copies. I swear to God, I'm going to do it. I love that book. It's so good. A very close second is Susan T. Chang's book, 36 Secrets, I think is what she calls it. I think she calls it 36 Secrets. But Susan T. Chang writes a bunch of books about like tarot correspondences and stuff. They're all very good. She actually has a book called Tarot Correspondences, which I highly recommend. But the book 36 Secrets is a decan walk. So, and she has Austin Coppock's book 36 Faces. And so you can see that influence in there. And it's she's an amazing writer in her own right, So definitely, and you can buy that one anywhere, like on it. I shall not speak its name. You can buy it on thrift books. You can buy it. I think you can custom request that Barnes and Noble order it for you if they don't have it already. Wherever books are sold for the most part. Anyway, so Susan T. Chang's book is very, very good and hits a lot of the same notes as Austin Coppock's book. But if you get a chance to get 36 Faces, buy it 100%. If it's at all reasonable, buy it. Such a good read. And then let's see. Yeah. And then Chris Brennan's Hellenistic Astrology. Very, very good. I think her name is Demetra George. Is that who I'm thinking of? They also write the 2 big books on Hellenistic astrology, which is really good. Also read ancient astrological texts, right? Like get your hands on like Ibn Ezra's Beginning of Wisdom and Agrippa's Occult Books of Philosophy and the Picatrix, and also there's this other one that I was just recently. Oh, Vedius Valens, right? Because like those, and like take it with a grain of salt, because old school, like Renaissance and before astrologers they can be very doom and gloom, but you do see a lot more you see some different stuff, I guess. It's worth exploring. And people always ask me, like, oh, how'd you learn so much about the tarot correspondences? I go, well, first of all, I knew about the tarot correspondences because you can look up any book about the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. They actually have a book called the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. It's like a giant tome, and there's within that book is a book T, which is all about tarot. And it tells you the esoteric titles, it tells you the correspondences and the different names. Anyways, it's a very cool thing to have. And then once you know those correspondences, you go, oh, they correspond to the decans, then look up the decans, like just look up astrology stuff and like look at your own chart and then pay attention to like when the sun goes in the sun's decan of Aries, right? When Saturn goes in Saturn's decan of Pisces, and then pay attention to what you see, right? We see when Saturn was in Saturn's decan of Pisces, we see restriction of the spiritual. We see spiritual corruption. We see looking for foundations. Also, Saturn represents as a malefic a lacking, right? A waning, a taking away of, a restricting, a stealing. And in Pisces, the water sign, we see water war, right? We see literally like Nestle trying to privatize water, which has been going on for a while, but it's bad, guys. It's bad. And when Saturn goes into Saturn's decan of Pisces, you see how bad it is. Now I have not verified this information from another source, so asterisks, I don't know how true this is, but Nestle, I do know, has been trying to privatize water for quite some time, and I heard that part of the reason why it was so difficult for firefighters to fight the LA fires was because they had essentially restricted these like public waterways, and there wasn't enough water, and that literally a lack of water for the public good. Saturn being a lack, and Pisces being water, ruled by Jupiter for public good, right? And that created a really hard situation. It's a good example of this kind of what I'm saying. However, just to be totally transparent, I will add that I believe, hold on one second here. Yeah, Saturn is no longer in Saturn's decan of Pisces, but the water wars were something that was definitely being discussed while Saturn was in Saturn's decan of Pisces. But also Saturn is still in Pisces, so you would still expect to see general restrictions around water and things like that, which suck. That totally sucks. Like and it's so annoying. Like I had this conversation with my sister, and I was like, look, if you were a housewife and you were slowly poisoning your husband with arsenic for like 10 years, even if he didn't die, that would still be attempted murder, right? You would still go to jail and be held accountable. And if he did die, doubly more so. So how come this individual gets to slowly kill somebody and go to jail, but when big corporations slowly kill people, they don't go to jail? When they take away water, which you need to live, they don't go to jail. When they poison your food with pesticides, which does result in like cancers and all kinds of different health ailments, even if it doesn't kill you, they are not held responsible. They don't go to jail. What's the deal with that? Anyway, not to get political, but like for real, like why are they not held accountable? If you slowly poison someone, you are held accountable. Why not corporations? If we consider them people, why aren't they tried like people? Anyway, oh God, don't get me started, but I'm so mad about it. And like water, people need water. It's not a scarce thing. We just like don't distribute it right? We don't give it to people who need it. Why does Flint, Michigan still have undrinkable water? Like why is that still a thing? I don't understand. The administration was like, oh yeah, we'll fix it, and they never did. And so at what point did we start holding people accountable for killing us? Like literally, oh, so pissed. Anyway, whatever, it's fine. It's not, but it is reality. And that's Saturn. Saturn's like, it's not fine, but it is reality. So you do have to deal with it in some way. Anyway, but the Saturn decan of Pisces is much calmer exception and accepting and exploring of structure, of pattern, of spirituality, of reality, right? Because it's a water. I don't have a lot of water in my chart. I have a lot of fire and a lot of earth, so I get stubborn and frustrated. But somebody who has a lot more water in their chart might be more 8 of Cups about it. They might be sadder about it, right? They might be like, okay, we need to let go of this system and move on gracefully to the next thing. But unfortunately, there's very little in my chart that implies grace. Sorry. I got a lot of passion, but grace not so much. Anyway, so yeah, healthy escapism card. Definitely. It can definitely be an escapism card. And the thing too is that Saturn is structure, and structured escapism, i.e. like meditation, perhaps, mayhaps a spiritual practice, a prayer, a ritual, a practice that incorporates ritual, which is when you do something, rigidly with structure to better yourself. The Eight of Cups can also be that, right? So it kind of depends on what you would get with other cards, how this can show up. A lot of the times it's about letting go and moving on to find something better, to find something more true and even more spiritual, right? However, it can definitely be like structured escapism. Pisces is great for escapism in general because it's a giant wide ocean. It's the same reason why Neptune in a chart can both create vague confusion wherever it is. It can also create oneness and unification in like an intense dissolving kind of a way. Like unlike Jupiter, which is it's more communal, it's more conscious, I would say. I don't know if that's quite the right word for it, but like when Jupiter dissolves boundaries and ego and brings people together and unites people, they're still like individuals. They're just united by a common cause. But when Neptune dissolves boundaries and borders, and it doesn't so much unite people as it dissolves people. It dissolves the ego entirely, right? It's a bigger, more out there, more kind of vague, hard to pin down expression of that kind of a thing. We say, Pisces is co-ruled by Neptune is as much as I would give Neptune rulership. The traditional seven, the sacred seven that you can see with the naked eye used by the ancients, that got them crazy good astrology for a crazy long time. And so you can get everything you need with just those sevens. But adding the outers, adding Neptune, Uranus, Pluto, that's very interesting. And I definitely think like when you track those transits, you can just for sure see it. And actually Chris Brennan and Austin Coppock were on a podcast about the year ahead astrology, which I highly recommend you guys go watch because they're talking about, when Neptune went into Pisces, everybody became a spiritualist, everybody became a mystic or a witch. And then their prediction, and I agree, I think this also will be the case, when Neptune goes into Aries, everyone's going to be a warrior, everyone's going to be a fighter, everyone's going to be up in arms. And I think that on the one hand, and I saw that, a lot of people were talking about this with Pluto going into Aquarius, which also you get the eruption and disintegration of systems, of norms for something better, newer rules that are more, because Aquarius is all about outside the box, Capricorn is about inside the box. Aquarius is about outside the box. And they're both ruled by Saturn and they both love rules. Aquarians don't hate rules. They hate current modern rules that exist right now. What they want is new rules. And usually they want to be the ones making the new rules, right? It's not that they hate regulation or structure. It's that they're often excluded from the structure that currently exists. And so they see it from an outsider or different perspective. And that kind of creates a desire for change, right? Based on the needs that they see that those really thriving within the structure don't necessarily see or don't want to see. If Saturn builds boundaries, Saturn also erodes and dissolves and corrupts boundaries, right? But it's a very different, he's a malefic, right? Jupiter can dissolve boundaries, but he does it in a fun, nice way. Like, let's come together and sing hymns and kumbaya and like have fun. That's like a Jupiter way to dissolve a boundary. Let's all invite everybody for dinner and have a nice time and like become one with our, whatever. Saturn's way of dissolving boundaries is more like, I don't know. When Saturn brings down boundaries, it's like, oh, this foundation is corrupt and has been corrupt for like 10,000 years. And so it's falling down. Whoops. It's not as nice. It's definitely more, malefic, right? Because it's harder. It's about responsibility. It's about anything, things that do not withstand the test of time, right? Things that need to be changed. I think Blaze, I think he goes by Astromax or Astrobimax, I believe, on Instagram. Wonderful astrologer. If you want your chart read, go to Blaze. So awesome. Again, not sponsored, just a fan. So great. But I'm pretty sure I think this is where I heard it from him. And he was talking about how Saturn in your chart can kind of sometimes manifest as places of construction, where it's like you're restricted from going to certain places because we're rebuilding, we're making something better. So on the one hand, yeah, things are dissolving, things didn't withstand the test of time. There's restrictions, there's detours, there's setbacks and delays, but we're doing it because we are responsible. We have to do this upkeep. We have to change this thing, and stuff is falling down, but it's also being built up. And so those are things that like Saturn can sometimes do in a transit to your natal, whatever, when Saturn transits over your natal sun, there's construction zones on your identity. When it's going over your Mercury, there's a construction zone on your communication. When you have your Saturn return, you're reevaluating all of these different Saturnian topics, and then you have to, you're basically your whole life goes under reconstruction, which is happens around your 30s, which is pretty accurate. By the time you're 30, you're kind of looking at the past and saying, okay, am I on the right track or not? And if not, and chances are nobody is 100% on the right track, so there's a little bit of like, what am I doing? Hence the 30 crisis, right? You start coming to grips with the fact that you're old. If you live to 60, this is half of your life. And it's not unreasonable that a person would only live to 60. Some people make it to 80 or even 100, but I think the average lifespan is like 70. So, 60 is within normal realms, within a normal range. So at 30, you're halfway there. It's like, are you where you want to be halfway through your life? That can be a difficult thing to come to terms with, right? Saturn makes difficult things. Saturn creates things that are difficult to come to terms with, but necessary, right? Because there is one truth we know for sure, and that is that you will die. You are born and you'll die. And we don't know what happens after that. And maybe there's some kind of consciousness that goes beyond. Maybe you get a new life. Who knows? If the system works the way that it is implied that it should, you won't remember and you won't be you. So this is the end of your life on Earth in this egoic manifestation at this time. So regardless of your spiritual beliefs, right, Saturn likes to point at the things we know are limitations. And one limitation is how much a person can do in a material life, a material lifespan. And it's difficult to come to terms with that. I think that the human consciousness generally protects itself from that reality. But every once in a while, you get a real shock of it. And you're like, oh God, this is all coming down around me. If you guys have ever watched the movie The Last Unicorn, Amalthea, beautiful unicorn who's immortal and wonderful and whatever, gets turned into a human. And her first response to being human is like, I can feel this body dying all around me. Like how horrifying it would be to have no need to conceptualize mortality because you're immortal, and then be thrust into a material frame that, while beautiful and at its peak, as is the case with Amalthea in her narrative, because she's turned into like a beautiful 20 something or maybe even younger, I don't know, even at her peak of beauty by human standards, she still is dying, right? Everybody since the moment of birth is going through a process of growth and then ultimately ending in decay and then death. And Saturn likes to remind us of that, and that's unpleasant. So that's why he's a malefic, right? I am a Capricorn rising, and Saturn is domicile in my chart and ruling my chart. So I'm very aware of this kind of thing all the time, which is part of the reason why I'm so insanely I need to get this deck done and this deck done. Like one of my biggest fears is that I'll die before I do all of the things I want to do. And not just fun things like that. I'll die before my projects are done. That's a huge fear that I have. So anyway, so that's why I'm always working on 5 projects at once. I don't know. I'm not saying that it's healthy, but it is one way to live, right? What's that song? There's a song called Lua by the same people who make that First Day of My Life song. I don't remember. I'm blanking on what their band name is or whatever. Anyway, they are talking about, oh, by the way, the Eight of Cups can also talk about escapism. It can be, the song lyric is, it's not something that I would recommend, but it is one way to live. In that song, they're talking about drug addiction and why that, trigger warning, drug addiction. Sorry, I'm really late. Anyway, the reason that they're talking about that, the reason I'm talking about that now is because while Saturn's decan of Pisces can be good structured forms of escapism, like meditation, like taking a moment to just relax and be alone, which is a huge thing that people need to do, to sit with themselves and sit with their thoughts and sit with their, with their thoughts, their beliefs, their feelings, and what that really means and implies. Hold space for the gravity of what your feelings are telling you, instead of just having anxiety be what does this mean? And people, I especially, don't get me wrong, I mean, this is I think a pretty universal experience, but you have a sensation like sadness, anxiety, this kind of restlessness, and you don't want to fully face why that is, because on some level that would require abandoning something that is well, we're supposed to be using Litha, so I'll pull up Litha. Abandoning something that means a lot to you, that has gained a lot of sentimental value, right? Like, we don't want to admit that we're super, super anxious all the time because actually, we want to change our life, move to another country, we want to quit our job, we want to leave our spouse of 10 years, we want to have a different something, right? Like, it's hard to admit things like that. If you build your life with somebody and then you realize that that person isn't for you, that's like a huge life-changing thing. That's crazy, right? That's like world shattering. And yet those feelings are trying to point us towards a thing. And it's true that not every anxiety is legitimate, and we all have good days and bad days. And sometimes an anxiety isn't telling you need to make a huge life-altering choice. Sometimes it's telling you need to confront the reality that, like, whatever is about the situation you're unhappy or uncomfortable with. And a lot of the times there's nothing we can do about it. We just have to accept it. Like, I am crazy uncomfortable about a lot of political goings-ons, as I'm sure a lot of people are, and there's very little that I can do about it. I mean, you can do the token thing, you can vote, and you can get, and then you can do a little bit more than that, get involved in your community and things like that. But at the end of the day, there's only so much one person can do before you have what's kind of colloquially called compassion fatigue, right? You get tired of always carrying everyone else's burdens, and that's like a real experience. We're not meant to have access to every problem in the world all at once. It's too much to like truly sit with and comprehend. Like, there's a certain need for structure, and that's kind of goes again into Saturn's decan in this way, right? There's a need to close off and escape from that. You can't always let everything in all the time. You'll explode, right? You just can't do it. You can't swallow the ocean. It doesn't work. And one of Saturn's things in water signs, and I'd argue in particular in Pisces, is learning how to put up those emotional boundaries, learning how to escape in a way that is uplifting and won't drown you, right? That buoys you instead of drags you down. So, as is the case with that song lyric, drug addiction is one way to escape. It is one way to live, so to speak, but it drags you down, right? And it ultimately, in many cases, unfortunately, will end you. And so we want, but a productive escapism is not so bad, right? Like escaping into a good book, or even playing a nice, role-playing video game, or creating something, throwing yourself into your work or your relationships, your home, or your meditation, your spiritual practice. Like, there are lots of ways to escape this kind of huge oceanic pool of collective suffering that will not drown you in its waters. There are ways to do that, but it takes time, it takes practice, and it's hard because it's a balance. You don't always want to close yourself off to the suffering of others because that is one point of human connection, right? We are meant to feel empathy with each other because we're all one organism, right? It's the same way, like when you have a pain in your arm, your leg doesn't resent it, right? If you have a pain in your arm, your legs carry you to the doctor or whatever, right? Like, we're all one collective organism, and so we're meant to feel and care for and nurture each other. However, our one collective organism is 8 billion people wide. Last time I checked, I'm sure it's more now. So there's a limit. You can't swallow the ocean. So you need to be able to disengage. And that's another thing that the Eight of Cups can mean. It has a wide range of meanings because obviously Saturn and Pisces individually have a large range of meanings. You put them together and there's a pretty wide breadth. So it can be that you are escaping, that you are finding something truer or better, or moving to something that is, more important. It can also be you're escaping, strategically escaping for a time period to get away from the oneness of everything that you just need to let go. Like, you just can't hold space for it anymore. Saturn rejoices in the 12th house. The 12th house is often a house of isolation and subconsciousness and kind of everything that's hidden or unseen. Why I'm bringing this up is because I think it's relevant when we talk about the planets to think about where they're happiest and what they kind of gravitate towards. In Pisces, I think there's a very real kind of feeling of like needing to be alone and sit with yourself and just like have you time. And it depends if you're, what question you ask. And this is why I say the tarot is very relative. There's true with astrology as well. Like, you can go, the horary route, I'm not sure. And you can ask a question and get a specific astrology chart for that question. But one of the limitations is, if you ask subsequent questions back to back, you're going to have charts that have the same rising sign and sometimes very, very, very little difference, if any. And so that's where there's one limitation of astrology, because the rising sign changes every 2 hours. So unless you pace yourself and you come up with a question every 2 hours, you're going to have a very different, experience. You're going to have a very similar experience, and that might be more difficult to parse out the nuances, right? So that you can do different timing techniques to rectify this, but that is one innate limitation of astrology. But that's one area where tarot really shines, because you can ask back-to-back questions and get completely different answers that respond to those questions. So depending on what you ask, how the Eight of Cups manifests for you, what it means, is going to be different. So with that in mind, why don't we finally pull another card, and let's just go off. So let's say the Eight of Cups is my significator card, right? This is like, what am I detaching from? Why am I feeling this way? I'm feeling very Eight of Cups. What's this about, right? And then we, do our little knock knock, and we go to the deck and we're like, hey, give me some clarification on this. I feel Eight of Cups. Why is Eight of Cups showing up right now? Okay, we got some answers. Look at that. We have the Queen of Cups and we have Temperance. Okay, so in lieu of that, and not in lieu of this, sorry, wrong word. Sometimes I just spew words so fast, they're completely inaccurate, whatever. My Mercury is Peregrine in Leo, so sometimes I struggle. I was having this conversation on an astrological forum from my astrology classes. That's nice because you get like a whole little community with it. And one of the things I was saying is like, oh yeah, so by the way, a peregrine planet is one that has no essential dignity one way or the other. It's not exalted. It's not exalted. It's not in detriment. It's not in fall. It's not domicile. It doesn't have any dignity by face, triplicity, or bound. There's nothing going for it really. So that's seen in astrology as being like this, called the wanderer, right? A nomad, an outlier, a vagabond. Sometimes they use. And so planets that are peregrine are considered to be ill aspected, because if they have they're ill placed, right? Because a planet that has some kind of, like, if you had Saturn and Saturn's decan, at the very least, you'd have something to work with, right? You have a place there, you have some power there. So Saturn and Saturn's decan of Pisces has something to work with. If you got, I don't know, if you got the sun in the Venus decan, well, that's a bad example because in Aries, the sun would be exalted. So let me come up with a different one. Let's say you got the sun in the sun's decan of Gemini, right? By face, triplicity, it's not, by triplicity or bound, you don't have it. There's not domicile, it's not exalted or whatever. But if you're in that decan, you have something to work with, right? There's some space for you. However, if the sun was in, like, I don't know, Jupiter's decan, well, that's not necessarily going to help you. You don't have dignity by triplicity because it's not a fire sign. So you don't have that. I don't think, I can check right now. I don't think there's a bound within that decan. Let me find out. Yeah, so in the Jupiter's decan of Gemini, the only bounds that are there are either Jupiter or Mercury. So there's no bound, there's no face, there's no triplicity. So if you had a sun in that decan, it would be peregrine. And then that's kind of mitigated, like if it's making an aspect to another planet. An aspect is a relationship, so that would help or whatever. But anyway, the point is, depending on if you looked that up, and there's not very much information, old astrology will say some really negative things about peregrine planets, but it's not totally uncommon. And I don't remember exactly where I heard this, but somebody was saying it's really a true manifestation of free will in a lot of ways, because you're not like given anything, you're not given any boon to work with, but you're also not given any kind of fall or any guidance to work around. So you're just kind of floating in the air, right? You're a vagabond. You're not, that planet is not committed to anything going on around it. It's not being oppressed. It's not being helped. Anyway, the point is, though, sometimes people will say that having a peregrine planet is like, oh, it's a crazy wild genius, but one that doesn't have any pull or drive to share that genius with the world. Some people will say, oh, it's a madman, a raving lunatic. It's completely disadvantaged. Just like going to a foreign place where you have no family, you have no friends, you don't speak the language. It's like your survival becomes a very real issue, right? And so you learn to make do, right? Like if you're in a situation like that, and the reason why sometimes it's considered a negative placement is like, and it's a very common teaching metaphor to visualize the planets going through these different aspects of the zodiac as being different kingdoms, right, in different situations. In Austin's course, he talks about, if you have If you have a planet that has its own decan, that's like having family, or like, you might be in a foreign place where you don't speak the language and you have no power or citizenship, but at least you have family that can help you out. And I think like having triplicity or something was like being a citizen in that I think it was either bound or triplicity that it was being a citizen, but that was the metaphor. It was like, you have certain rights and you have certain protections. So you might not have power exactly, but you're not going to be just totally like, you're familiar enough with the customs to get by, and you're a citizen, you're born there, you understand how it works. So you can kind of deal with it. So that's why having a peregrine planet is considered to be like a little bit challenging, because you don't have anything to work with. You don't speak the language, you have no family, you have no citizenship, you have no status one way or the other. You're just a drifter going through that kingdom. And so planets that are there express themselves that way. And like, what are the ways that people of those situations can act? Like, on the one hand, you can work really hard and try to figure out, how to hustle and bustle and how do you make it, and you can observe, or you can get really scared, you can steal stuff, you can lie or cheat, or commit crimes or run away, or you can be a madman, a raving lunatic, homeless on the street, ramping and ranting about all these different things that no one understands because they don't speak your language. Like, these are the kinds of situations a peregrine planet might get into, and depending on what that planet is, that's how it how it might receive those gifts, or how it might be treated. I don't know, it's an interesting thought experiment. But my point is, my Mercury is a peregrine Mercury in Leo. It is co-present a domicile Leo sun, which, that helps, I think. However, I was talking about it in my astrology form, and I was like, well, it's like a lot to say, and a lot to say very quickly, and also kind of rambling. So I'm like 50-50. I can say something beautifully insightful with artistic flair, or I'll come off as a complete rambling lunatic and no one will understand what I'm talking about. And like, it literally, that's been my experience my whole life. Is like, either people think I'm really, really smart because I articulate all of these very complex things very well, or they think I'm really, really dumb, and they think they have no idea what I'm saying. I believe stupid things. I'm an idiot. I can't spell. I can't add, right? Like, all these different things. And that's been my experience. And Mercury, right? Because Mercury is the planet that rules communication, intellect, dexterity, analysis, pattern recognition. Like, literally your ability to do mathematics and to read and to write is a Mercury thing. And I'm dyslexic, right? It's like a hard thing for me to do. I essentially was born not speaking my own language, so on the one hand, but it's like unpredictable, basically. It's an unpredictable thing for me. So I like to write and I love to read, but it is something that I struggled with. And I also have ADHD, so I get super hyper fixated on things. So the things I know about, I tend to accumulate a lot of knowledge on, but the things I'm not interested in, the things I don't know about, I really don't know about. Sometimes things that other people take for granted, but those are just it's because it's Mercury that's peregrine, right? My daughter has a peregrine Venus that I'm very concerned about, and I wonder what that's going to be like for her. I don't know. I'll have to observe. But it's, if Venus is like love and beauty and relationships and attraction and aesthetics and things like that, I mean, perhaps it's going to be like her aesthetic taste is going to be like wildly different from everyone around her. People are going to think her tastes are bad, or maybe she'll purposely be attracted to things that are like gruesome or grotesque. And I mean, that's a certain type of art in and of itself, right? The art of the grotesque. But it does kind of speak to perhaps a peregrine Venus, maybe. And it's interesting too, because like, there's a lot of actresses and stuff who have peregrine Venuses who are very beautiful. So it's not that they're not beautiful, but there's always something going on, right? It's always like, well, it's not that the planet isn't there. It's that it does what it does in a very weird way that is not always received well by the environment that it's thrown into. I only want to talk about astrology and tarot and pagan mysteries and ancient traditions. And if I'm in a group of like evangelical Christians, that's going to go over really poorly for me, probably. So, I think it depends. I was born and raised in an area that is generally either not religious or conservatively religious. And so talking about these kinds of things. And here's the thing too, if you're in America and you're not religious, you probably still have very Christian puritanical views that have assimilated by osmosis. Like, people just assume and adopt Christian moralities without even recognizing it, and that happens all the time. For example, the assumption that if you're good and you work hard, you will succeed is one that is very closely linked to Christian and most Abrahamic really ideas, because it kind of presupposes that there's a universe universal justice. There's a big sky daddy with a javelin and a sword who's like, guilty, you get a car, innocent, whatever, you do this, you get punished in hell, or what. Like, it presupposes this kind of this order that makes it so that if you are good, good things happen. But that's not reality for a lot of people. And so when you are not religious, but you assimilate these kinds of views through osmosis, there's a danger here that often occurs where you don't know where those views or morals are coming from, and you don't necessarily, like, because, okay, here's the other thing. There is a type of religious lens where people of Abrahamic faiths will say, well, you're suffering, and the reason you're suffering is to, it's a test of faith, and God will reward you, and you just have to keep that faith alive. And, like the story of Job, basically, right? Where, I don't know if you guys are familiar, but in the Christian and also Jewish Bibles, I think in the Quran, I haven't read the Quran, but I believe they all have kind of the basic Old Testament thing going on, so it should be there as well. But Job, I think it's Job. Job. Anyway, he's this guy who's like super, super faithful to God, and he does everything great, and God rewards him, and he's like so loved by God or whatever. But then the devil is like, hey, you know what? Job only worships you because you give him such a great life. I bet if you took everything away from him, and if you killed his family and gave him plague and all this stuff, I bet he wouldn't worship you anymore. And for some reason, God takes that bet because, that's like a super awful thing to do, but fine. I wouldn't bet with my children's lives that way, but that's just my perspective. That's my opinion. Anyway, so he's like, oh, okay, I'll take your bet. I bet that Job will still worship me and help because he's a faithful, pious man. So they do that. Job loses everything. He suffers. I think a couple of his children die. It's awful. It's just really sad and depressing, but he still worships God. And the lesson is supposed to be, it's a metaphor for when everything is taken from you, you still have your faith. And of course, if God is also a metaphor for our highest self, our sense of belonging in the universe, collective consciousness, for collaboration between all species, for universal love, then yes, that is something you still have that will still protect you and keep you going. If your sense of God is just big sky daddy, I don't know, ? I guess that's for you to figure out. But the point is, so this idea that if you are good, good things happen is oftentimes, especially in America and in other places where Abrahamic religions are the majority religion, that's presupposed. That's an assumption from that religious group that you might not know you have adopted because it's so ambivalently around you. It's just everywhere. Not ambivalently. What I meant to say was, what's the word? When it's around and you don't notice it. Ubiquitous. It's so ubiquitous. Anyway, whereas, for example, if you were in India, where Hinduism is a really big thing, then you might think the reason you're suffering is because you are reaping the punishment of your karma from a past life, right? So the presupposing, right? The presumption there is that you must suffer in silence because you are bearing the result of previous actions that need to be accounted for. It's a different way to view that. And it's not necessarily suggesting that you're bad in this lifetime, but that you're doing penance in this lifetime. So it's kind of a different perspective, and you might have a different way of looking at the people in your community based on the perceptions of the dominant spiritual morality. Anyway, if you were raised like me, where your family was not religious, but did adopt those and did not recognize the source, you can get into some pretty tricky situations because your takeaway isn't have faith, things will get better if you just believe and you hope and you believe in the collective goodness of universal consciousness. The takeaway is you're bad. You're not doing well because you're doing it bad. You're doing it wrong. And that's not the case. I'm sorry to say this, but it's just, I will take a firm stance and say that's not true. That's not always true. Sometimes it's true. Sometimes you reap the benefits of your consequences of your actions, and sometimes you're in a shithole because you made a bad decision. That happens. Sometimes you're a very bad person, and that's why, because you are cruel and mean and people don't want to help you anymore. But that is not always the case. Sometimes you are a really good moral person who is virtuous and pure and true and the best of everything, but shit happens anyway, right? Sometimes it's like that. Sometimes you try your hardest and you do everything the best to your abilities, and it's just not enough. There's a restriction there. There's something going on, and it's not your fault, but that's your reality now. And so, it took me like rediscovering my own source of spirituality spirituality and religion and whatever that means in my personal context, which, by the way, spoiler alert, is very eclectic and blended and not really any one thing. However, that was one of the things that really I think motivated me early on, was this it wasn't ever said like that in my family. No one ever said to me, hey, look, if you're failing, it's because you're not trying hard enough. But that was what was said without being said. That was the implication, was that if you were better, things would be better. And that's not always the case, right? I mean, it's just, you can't pray everything away, right? Some things are just what they are. So anyway, and the Saturn decan of Pisces, right? Figuring out where is the line, where's the boundary. Some things you can pray away, right? Some things you can really focus on and work hard and change. Some things you can change and some things you can't. So figuring out the line between those things, that's the challenge of Saturn's decan in Pisces. And I think that's a predominating challenge in most people's lives in general, right? It's especially like the more you get into, mysticism, and by the way, like Christians and Jewish peoples and Muslims too, they all have a line of spiritual mysticism, right? Of spells, i.e. witchcraft. There's very, very like ritual and very esoteric branches of those religions that are oftentimes less obvious, I think, to people who don't really like study in depth religious topics, but they exist. They're out there. Oh boy, are they out there. And I don't know, lighting incense and then, sending thoughts out into universe to manifest change, that's prayer to a Catholic and that's a spell to a pagan. So I'm not sure, where's the line here. It's just, anyway, doesn't matter. Point is, if I were to get this in a reading, right? So we have Temperance. Temperance is actually Sagittarius. That's the other. So we have an indication here for Jupiter on both ends. This is a decan of Pisces. So this is a very specific vibe of Pisces. Whereas this card, because it is a major arcana card, Temperance, represents overall the entire decan, all the decans, right? All of Sagittarius. So Temperance is one way to go about it. It's moderation, right? It's being able to refuse excess. Also, it's synthesis. Really what's going on here is an act of synthesis. It's combining the best of both aspects to get something that is better than any one of its parts. Now, that does not always happen. That's, there's a fallacy about, always going the middle way, taking a little bit from A and a little bit from B, making a better thing that is C. C is not always better. A little bit of poison, if you take a little bit of poison from a poisoned well and a little bit of water from a pure well, that does not necessarily make better drinking water than either wells, right? However, there is a truth to, snake venom is used in anti-venom. And so there is a synthesis, an alchemy, right? Combining the best of things to getting something that is better than the sum of its parts. It's not always the case that happens, but it can be done and it does happen. So Sagittarius is big on that. It's about the unification, but this time unification with a projective purpose. So in old texts, astrological texts, they use terms masculine and feminine, but what they're really saying is projective or receptive. With Pisces, we're receiving all of this universal oneness, right? It's combining through just kind of letting go and letting everything in and just like being there and just vibing, right? It's a very receptive. You're receiving all of these, all of the waters of the ocean and all of the wisdoms found therein or whatever. With Sagittarius, it's very projective. You're projecting, like the archer with the arrow projects the arrow into reality. This is like, I will go out and preach my spirituality, right? I'm going to go out and adventure and find truth in the world, and I'm going to go make my way and do my thing. Like that, like Pisces is like, I feel for all of the suffering in the world. Then Sagittarius is like, I'm going to join the Peace Corps and hand out bottles of water to people who are, starving or overly thirsty, people who don't have clean drinking water. This is like, I'm going to go project my will and make a difference and do something about it. So Sagittarius tends to be a lot more active. Before I talked about the Eight of Wands, the Eight of Wands is actually the Mercury ruled decan of Sagittarius. So you can see the difference between Sagittarius and Pisces when you look at the Eight of Cups and the Eight of Wands, or when you look at, different aspects of those. I don't know. I really like having the decans grafted on to the minor arcana, because you do get like a super specific manifestation of this greater energy. So it gets useful, right? Because sometimes it's all of it, right? Sometimes it's just Sagittarius. And sometimes we want the Mercury ruled decan of Sagittarius. Sometimes it's not about going out and doing everything and synthesizing and unification. Sometimes it's like specifically we're delivering a package, right? Mercury's decan of Sagittarius, the Eight of Wands, oftentimes comes up when it's like swift progress or receiving something swiftly, like a you place an order for, I don't know, a fancy bauble and you get it in the mail the next day and you drew the Eight of Wands. It's like, yeah, it's coming fast. The thing you want is coming fast. Also sudden insights, right? Again, it depends on the context of the other cards and the reading and stuff. But yeah, so what I'm saying here is like, yeah, so if we get this card and we have this kind of general feeling of malcontent, we're not sure why or what we need to let go of, and like, why are we feeling this? And when then we get Temperance, we're like, you have to let go of things so that you can combine the right proportions, right? I mean, we were talking earlier about needing to escape in very specific constructive ways. Well, Temperance, or, you know, moderation or synthesis, is a great way to do that. Like, for example, we are so frustrated with all of the corruption in our world, but we also just don't have a space to like take it in right now. So maybe we go play a video game where we can, like, you know, I don't know, take on and tackle corruption in a more visceral way, if you get my meaning. We can dethrone some kings in our virtual escape reality for a little bit and blow off some steam. So that might be, you know, kind of an emotional compromise. Like, look, I have this feeling, I have this frustration, I have to do something with it, but I don't want to be like, I don't know. Anyways, not to get too far down that end, there be dragons. But anyways, and this idea of like, you know, there's part of this that's true and there's part of this that I don't want to use right now, so I have to combine it in some way that is constructive or good. The Queen of Cups, I love to read court cards as being people in our lives and queens as being nurturers, right? Caregivers. I tend to think of them as the fixed signs in the zodiac, because being a fixed sign means you want to keep something going for as long as possible, something that already exists. So queens tend to want to make the best of, or give alliance, give assets, give resources to something that already exists for the sake of making it the best version of whatever it is. Like a king card represents somebody who tends to invest in something because they have a vision, they get something going, and they want it to be their way. So a king can definitely be an ally, particularly an upright king, but it's more like an investor or a teacher or somebody who's going to like lead the way and try to get you to do things the way they want it to be done. Versus a queen is more of a nurturing presence. Is more somebody who's going to encourage you to do what you want to do. Having a queen as an ally is an amazing resource because they are interested in your vision, right? Because what do queens do? They support kings. If you have a vision, then you want somebody who's going to really support that vision. Then, you know, queen, right? Now again, I also don't read court cards as gendered, though. It's just another way of symbolically saying passive, you know, receptive versus projective energy. A king goes out and conquers and makes decisions and rules and does all the things that kings do. And a queen, you know, like gets allies, right? Provides support, emotional support, and political support. A queen ensures the continuation of the kingdom by giving birth to the heir. So it's just a role. It's like a status thing. So, you know, you can be represented by a queen or a king and be male or female or any combination thereof or neither. It's really just what is your role contextualized by the situation, right? Sometimes we're kings and sometimes we're queens and sometimes we're pages, and it really depends. When I go to my astrology class, I'm a page because I'm learning how to do things. I'm looking at how things are. I have no authority in that class at all. I'm just looking and learning, observing, you know, playing with it, talking, being curious about it. Versus when I talk to, say, I don't know, when I talk to a client or when I give a tarot reading, then, you know, I'm not a page anymore, right? Have more authority. So depending on the circumstance, maybe I'm a king, or depending if I'm giving that person a lot of resources that they need to make their decision, maybe I'm a queen, right? So it just depends on your role. I guess in that situation, I would say probably more queen because you're giving the client the resources that they need and answering their questions. But if you were like, I don't know, starting off a project and you were like, I'm going to make this thing or whatever, like I'm the king of my company, right? So I'm Xia Hunt and I make, you know, tarot products and tarot cards and I get to make them exactly how I want. And this is my vision, right? That's king. That's like a king energy. So yeah, but it's always shifting is what I'm saying. Like, and when I'm bending to the will of my toddlers and I'm cooking all of their food and I'm, comforting their emotional woes, even though I might consider them to be very trivial, but I care about them, I want to nurture them, I want to make them the best that they can be, well then I'm a queen, right? When I interact with my husband, I'm definitely the king. Just to give you an example, that's not gendered. When I interact with my husband, I'm like, hey, I provide the material resources, please clean my dishes. Do you know what I mean? Like, like you get to make rules. You get to make the decisions because of your status in context with the greater whole. And that shifts, right? And then, and it's the same even within the same person in different situations. Like I'm a queen when I'm nurturing my children, but when I say, nope, it's bedtime, you're going to bed because I want to go play video games now and it's late and I don't, and you're tired and you have to go to bed anyway. Like this is happening. You cannot stay up, right? That's more king because they want to do something, but I'm saying, nope, it's my way. I have authority. I get to choose. So those are the difference between king and queens. They shift. That's why you get to shuffle the deck, right? Because we're all shuffling through these energies all the time. So I know that it's a kind of a hot topic for some people at this point, at this juncture in our life, because we're really expanding and exploring what these genders really mean and why they mean the things they mean, contextualized by, our history as a culture. So some people get very hung up on presentations of gender in tarot. And I will say, that's valid. That makes sense. I do still think that there is a utility in recognizing why it is that way, why we have these symbols and being able to take a step back from that and not take it personally, right? Like, I think that I think there's some utility there. And I also, there's different decks too. If, there's a line, it's always going to be relative and you and your own temperaments. And so if that's something that really just hinders more than it helps, you can find decks where kings and queens are called, for example, or called different things, are like the nameless one, right? It's a mask. It's a different mask of the zodiac sign. And I don't have any male or female anythings. There's no humans in the nameless one. The closest thing is the Venetian style masks that are representing the zodiac signs, but they're not gendered. They're just the zodiac signs. So like, it depends on what you're comfortable with, but also I do feel like there's generally some benefit to working through discomfort and stepping away from that and turning on our Mercury caps and trying to really analyze what that means and why it might mean that way as a impartial observer. But again, everyone has their own traumas and reasonings and perspectives. And so that's not like a always true kind of a thing. But if you're able to, I think it's worth exploring. Anyway, because that was one of the things that kind of threw me early on. And it does depend as well on your perception of like how you use tarot, right? Some people will get this court card and they'll say, oh, a red-headed woman that you interact with. Right? I mean, some people will be very literal. I tend not to be. At least not that literal. I would say, yes, maybe a woman, maybe somebody with a more nurturing energy, right? Which can be a man or a woman, again, depending on circumstance and context. So it just depends. Anywho, I'm going to drink some coffee. I'm so thirsty. Give me 1 second. My husband, my partner, my very long-suffering ball and chain here, did a very queenly thing by going out of his way to give me coffee, literally the Queen of Cups, right? Because filling my cup doth runneth over with things I need to materially survive and feel emotionally like I can do this now. I literally like, although maybe it would be a queen of wands, actually, because coffee is ruled by Mars, but also because it gives you energy, so it's more like gas-like, versus a queen of like gas as in fuel, right? Giving you fuel, making, lighting your passions or whatever, versus a queen of cups is probably more nurturing, more like I'll listen to you cry and I'll tell you it's okay and I want to, really hold space for your watery feelings, Anyway, my point is though, he got me coffee this morning and it was really nice because it's from Pete's Coffee, which is one of my favorite chains. I prefer little indie cafes, but it's, how it is. Chains are everywhere and it's convenient because they're always the same. So Pete's Coffee is my go-to chain coffee. And it's really great. And he remembered the ad shot espresso for my Americano, but he forgot the 3 pumps of coconut sweetener. So I have a very bitter, very energizing caffeinated beverage, which no one is here to hear about my caffeine preferences, but like, it's so bitter. Anyway, it's fine. It's not a big deal. Let me read some comments. But the point is, he was really trying to do it, go out of his way to like nurture me in a very specific way because he knows that I love to have my coffee. My artisanal coffees are my biggest, that's not true, one of my biggest creature comforts, indulgences. One of my biggest financial bad habits, not the biggest, but one of the biggest, right? We've all got them. But I love an artisanal coffee. I don't know. I just love it. So let's see here. Got some comments here. I always have something. I didn't know any of that. Fun. Nice. Yeah. I think that was probably in context of the history lessons that I sometimes give, or maybe the wheel order. I don't know, but I'm glad. Yeah, learning things is fun. Let's see here. Thank you for the Rex. You're welcome. Your depictions of the Eight of Cups are incredible. Oh, thank you. Yeah. I really appreciate that. I call it the healthy escapism card, definitely. Could be healthy. This situation, by the way, seems healthy, right? This is like a good way to escape. This is a good productive thing, right? Maybe you talk to somebody who loves you, who's going to nurture you. You go and you talk to somebody about your feelings, about, hey, I feel like, this isn't right, or something about this is missing. And this is somebody who's going to hold space for you, take that in, give you comfort, give you nurturing, hold you, tell you it's okay, help you sort through this emotional turbulence that you're going through. When you get the Queen of Cups and you get the Eight of Cups, this is like you are trying to leave something behind and find a truer spiritual foundation. You're needing to escape or build boundaries because there's too much going in right now. You need to disengage from something and go somewhere in some way. And this is somebody who's going to nurture you and help you to do that, right? Because this is an upright Queen of Cups. There's somebody who you could go to, who will listen to you, who will validate you, who will say, yes, you're right. There is suffering and that is difficult. And also your suffering is real and your suffering needs to be attended to and you need to do what's good for you, right? That Queen of Cups energy is somebody who is on board with your emotional experience. They're not somebody who's going to try to, well, if they're upright, if they're an upright queen, they're not somebody who's going to try to emotionally manipulate you or gaslight you or tell you you're wrong to feel that way or you're suffering because you're bad or you deserve what you're getting or whatever. The upright Queen of Cups is someone who's going to be like, yes, you're valid. That absolutely is the case. That's true. And, good luck on your journey. And here's my insights. Here's my wisdom that I will just give to you so that you can be the best version of you, so that you can find what you're really looking for, right? This is somebody who's an ally, who's dedicated to giving you the resources you need to succeed in this emotional realm. Versus if the Queen of Cups was reversed, we might say, oh, okay, this is emotional manipulation, or somebody who's just withholding that. It doesn't always have to be malicious. I find that just as often, it's just somebody who doesn't have the space themselves to offer you that support. Like they would normally really love to offer you that emotional support, but they're also going through a crazy Eight of Cups moment and they can't take any more either. You know what I mean? Like their cup's completely full in the bad way. So they gotta empty their own stuff and they don't have time or space to deal with you right now. So it definitely depends. It can, however, because I don't want to downplay it, it can be an emotional manipulator. The Queen of Cups reverse is somebody who holds all of your secrets and all of your confidence and maybe doesn't deserve to, right? Somebody who is perhaps looking to give it to someone else, or who doesn't want you to succeed, or doesn't want you to give you that support, or, does think that it's because of, you earned your suffering or whatever. Like it's not a good shoulder to cry on when you get reverse queens. And here's the thing. I don't think this is talked about enough. Kings are powerful, sure. A king is only as powerful as himself, right? As he is, as they are, I guess I should say, as she is, right? A king is as powerful as the king is, just period, because of all their resources, because of all their allies. A queen has the power to make a king powerful, right? Like a queen gives them the assets. A queen gives somebody the emotional reassurances, the support, the material resources, if it's, the Queen of Pentacles, the encouragement, if it's the Queen of Wands, right? The queens give people those allyships. They make connections. They help a person facilitate their own vision. So having that on your side is huge. And having a queen who is not on your side is devastating. Having a queen who's like, a Queen of Cups is still really good at navigating emotional waters. A Queen of Cups knows exactly what you're feeling, but they are either disinclined to help, unable to help, or worse, actively seeking to undermine you, to gaslight you, to manipulate you. They want to take your power away, right? Queens can give power, they can take power. That's how it works. Kings have power, but they only have as much power as they have because of who they are and the assets that they have. You know, a king backed by a reverse queen is not very powerful, actually. They are somebody who wants to go do their thing, but they don't necessarily have the resources, or they have somebody constantly undermining them. Like, the realm must be unified, right, for the king to be powerful. So anyway, so that's the idea, right? Like, I don't think it's talked about enough, but having reverse queens is devastating. Like, having a reverse king is like, oh, your boss is mad at you. And that does suck. Don't get me wrong. But having a reverse queen is like your best friend or mom is out to get you. Like, that sucks. That's awful, right? Because that's somebody who has a lot of power over if you are successful or not, and in a very kind of taken for granted kind of way. Like, if your best friend is secretly plotting your demise, that's a huge bummer. But if your boss is just out to make a buck for themselves and they don't care about you, you kind of expect it. It's definitely, kings are, and this is another thing too, in the Rider-Waite-Smith system, the court cards are divided not by zodiac, but by element. And so all of the kings are seen as partaking of fire and then sub-ruled by whatever, right? So the King of Cups is like the fire of water, and fire is out to grow itself, to consume, to be bigger and brighter, and it's visual. You can see a fire, right? Like, when it's coming. It makes sound, it makes smell, it's bright, it's luminous. And so kings are oftentimes pretty transparent with like what they think they're doing, which is why often when you see kings, you're looking at bosses, CEOs, managers, people who have power over you, who very obviously tell you, I want you to do this thing. And obviously that thing is going to help them, right? I will give you $6,000, but I want you to make me 20 grand with your business, right? King of Pentacles. It's very obvious. They're not altruistically giving because out of the generosity of their hearts or because they love you, like a Queen of Pentacles might. They're giving you a loan, an investment. They want to see some return on that. But a queen doesn't necessarily. And what makes queens, when they're reversed, very dangerous is it's the same sentiment negatively, right? Like, they don't necessarily care if they win. They just don't want you to win. They're not going to give you those resources. Now, again, it doesn't have to be malicious. It can just be, look, I can't right now. Everybody goes through moments where they would be there for their best friend. They love their best friend. They want them to succeed, but they just can't deal with the same drama over and over and over and over again. They just can't listen to it this time. You know what I mean? It's not that they hate you. It's just that they don't have it in them right now. They don't have the energy. It's just, they don't have it, right? They can't give you what they don't have. They don't have that kind of emotional compassion right now. But anyway, but it can also be malicious, right? And we need to hold space for both possibilities, because that does happen to people. Sometimes you go to somebody and you expect support and love and they can't give it to you because they're tired. And sometimes you go to somebody and you expect support and love and they don't give it to you because they're cruel and manipulative and jealous or whatever else. Whatever other emotional thing, because it's the Queen of Water, right? So we're dealing with emotional and relationships. They're jealous. They're I don't know, they have grudges. I don't know, something like that. They have a vested interest in seeing someone else emotionally succeed. I don't know. But we're not dealing with that. This is an upright queen. So this is a good, sound support system. This is somebody who wants you to succeed, somebody who's trying to be there for you the best they can, somebody who's receptive to your woes. Really think, and that's what I was saying about the elements. All kings are seen as partaking of fire. Fire of water is the King of Cups. All queens are seen as partaking of water. So the Queen of Cups is the water of water, right? The most receptive, the most nurturing. Like, really picture that, like, primordial, archetypal, loving mother. That's like the Queen of Cups upright. It's like somebody who just is like, come here, baby. I know how to make you feel better. I'm going to love you and support you. And you're doing great and you're so valid. And I'm here for all your suffering. And everything about that is just, that whatever, etc. The Queen of Cups is the most like loving mommy vibes, right? But the Queen of Cups reversed is like evil mommy vibes. It's like, the jealous mother, if we're going to assign like a, I don't know, like a trope to it or a character type to it. So anyway, but when it's upright, and you guys, you probably know like how much of a boon that really is to get somebody who's like that on board, holding space for your very complicated Eight of Cups kind of emotions. They don't come by but once in a blue moon, truth be told. At least in my experience. Anyway, and so then we get the Temperance card too. And so I would generally read this as like, okay, so we're detaching, we're trying to go towards something. That something is probably very spiritual in nature. The spirituality aspect is really buffed by this Temperance card, because again, Temperance corresponds to the entire segment, the entire 30 degrees of Sagittarius. Sagittarius is ruled by Jupiter. Jupiter is about faith, spirituality, blessings, abundance, expansion, uplifting stuff, all kinds of good things, jovialness, joy, right? And so we're looking for this like truer expression of like how we can act on our spirituality, what we need to let go. And we have somebody who's willing to help us on that journey. We have someone who's willing to hear us out, to be a sounding board for our woes and existential crises, and rub our backs and tell us it's going to be okay. And specifically because Temperance has this action to it, because it's the projective aspect of Jupiter. It's like we want to do something. We want to be able to walk the middle way and to do something that is productive but not necessarily dismissive. And we want to get there. And it's not that we have a hard no, it's that we need to tinker a bit. We need to adjust, right? So the thing that this Eight of Cups is responding to then, as indicated by these two cards, is like, there's something out of balance. It's not necessarily that we have to abandon the material world that we've built up. It's that there's too much or not enough in some way, right? Maybe it's not that loving our car is bad. Maybe it's that the car is nice and it's necessary and it's great and all that, but it's also not going to fix all my problems, right? It's also not going to make me feel super loved and valued in a societal way. There's some kind of disproportionate emotional expectation that we need to work through, and there's an action we can take that will help us once we get these things in balance, once we're moderate, right? So it's not that like, going out and buying some stuff to make you feel better, what they call that, retail therapy. It's not like it's out of control. It's that, okay, let's recognize this for what it is. Maybe we do that sometimes, but it's not getting us there, right? We need to adjust. So when I see Temperance in a reading, and if I were to do this as just a normal reading, I'd be like, yeah, it's not bad, right? This is like healthy escapism. This is just adjusting things. It's moderating things. It's trying to make two truths better by uniting the best parts of both and getting rid of the parts that are no longer helping us. And we have somebody who is experienced who can help us do that. And that's how I would read that, right? And then, again, I was talking earlier, like, well, how do you know if the Eight of Cups is saying like, hey, you've collected a bunch of baubles and you need to get rid of them because they're distracting you from your spiritual truth, or I need to escape because I'm going through something really hard and I can't deal with it right now, or the other less severe Eight of Cups that's like, oh, I just need a moment for myself, or I need some structured escape, some structured healthy escape, like meditation, like gardening, like going off and having a nice walk aimlessly wandering around the night sky, right? I just need a minute to just kind of like chill in the cosmic oneness of everything, and it's fine, like I'll be better, but I just need a minute. Well, that's how you know, is that if it's contextualized by an upright Queen of Cups and an upright Temperance Arcana card, then you're like, oh, okay, like it's not that bad actually. This is not that severe. Temperance is ruled by Jupiter. Jupiter is a good thing. Jupiter's a benefic. So maybe we're figuring out that things are not, oh, and this is another thing too, actually. Austin Coppock brought this up in, I don't remember if it was in 36 Faces or if it was just in one of his like lectures or something. But he also said that like people discovering like, oh shit, prayer actually does something. Oh, wow, our thoughts have mass. Oh, witchcraft is a thing. Spell work can be utilized. Like, wow, astrology is a real thing. When people go beyond that superficial layer of surface reality, and when they really get into the surface, or into the beneath the surface, and they figure out like, wow, there's more to life than meets the eye. Actually, the cosmos is so much greater and grander and more more connected than I ever thought. That's also an Eight of Cups moment. Like when you discover that astrology is not just your sun sign and there's an incredibly intricate structured system that's been alive and well for over 2,000 years, and you're like, oh my God, this is accurate actually. This is not just, oh, Leo's like attention. This is like, oh, but your Venus is being affected by Mercury at this time in your life, so you're going to be, you're going to produce books because of this, and like all, it gets really, really intricate and really, really finessed, like like the most delicate of handmade clocks or something. Like, that's also an Eight of Cups moment. And it's a really fun Eight of Cups moment to wade into that water and be like, wow, I am supported by a wealth of universal connection and consciousness. It's not just baloney, and Saturn likes to tell us when things are baloney, right? Saturn likes to be like, this is fucking stupid. Saturn is a really cold no. And so when you grow up, like as I did, in a very hyper logical environment, like my dad was a lawyer, we had to justify and produce evidence for every single thing we thought or believed. It was exhausting. And when you grow up like that and you have no room in your heart for spirituality, it's very isolating and it's very lonely, and there's a very obvious lack. I think people are spiritual beings and they need something there to ground them and to guide them. I'm not going to say, it doesn't have to be X, Y, or Z spirituality, but it has to be something, right? There's a place for spirituality in the human psyche, in the human heart. At the very least, and I try not to make I try not to be like, oh, it has to be this way, right? But that is something that I very firmly believe. It doesn't have to be Christianity, it doesn't have to be Islam, it doesn't have to be Hinduism or Buddhism or paganism, but it has to be something. People need a spiritual center or spiritual core. There's a place for that in our emotional, in our heart, and in our mind. And so when you don't have that, there's a noticeable vacancy, and it's unsettling, it's unnerving. And so for me, when I went and explored these other areas of intuition, right, of not just needing to justify or give examples and data and evidence for every single thing I felt, when I realized I can just have a feeling, and that just exists, and there's a space for that, there's a utility to that. Like that opened up a world for me. And I think that one of the more positive applications of the Eight of Cups is world opening, right? It's being like, oh, we're not in a pond, we're in an ocean, right? We're in an infinite cosmos of potentiality. Like we live in a reality that is receptive to us, that isn't just this stone cold rock I'm standing on, but a living, breathing organism that is receptive to the wants and needs of those within it. So, I mean, that's really uplifting, actually. And to realize like where the doors are in those hidden structures of mind and heart, that's part of what the Eight of Cups is about, and so it can be very uplifting. But again, right, as discussed before, like there's restriction that drags you underwater and that, that drowns you. And there are, finding out structures and where the natural grooves in the rock are, where up is down, and how to navigate the waters, right? There's both manifestations in the Eight of Cups, right? There's discovering the infinite and how meaningless and minuscule these little tokens of material matter actually are in context of the greater web of cosmic psyche. And then there's, being overwhelmed and drowned by, I wasted my whole life trying to be a CEO when really I just wanted to be loved and respected. Right? Like Eight of Cups can be both those things. And it depends on context. And in this case, this is a good context because, it's Jupiter. Oh, and see, look, at the bottom of the deck, I love to do this at the end and we're kind of running out of time, although I do want to do at least one other example. But at the bottom of the deck, we have the Fool, and the Fool upright, right? So this is reinforcing this whole narrative of like exploration and freedom, experimentation, fun and joy, and really like taking that leap of faith. Like for me, believing in astrology was not something that I was predisposed to or just given. It wasn't something, and then I get really upset when people, it's always, I shouldn't use absolute terms. It's very often quote unquote scientific neckbeards on the internet who are not scientists, who just are like, have a high school education of science, and they think, oh, I am logical supreme. And they just dismiss things without even knowing it, even though the spirit of science is to always remain open to new possibilities if data and evidence present themselves. And anyone who has an advanced understanding of astrology realizes how accurate it actually can be. And by the way, we all literally, what science will say things like, oh, in our atoms, the molecules, the essence of what makes our physical reality came from stars, right? Like we're stardust, right? Like when, from the beginning of cosmos, when time met space and started this epic journey of unfoldment, like we're part of that manifestation. We are part of the universe. We're literally stars, right? We're like parts of space that decided to fuck off and have an experience for a minute. Like that's an amazing reality. And then in the face of that, which science okays that thought that that everything that's in us was also a part of the cosmic everything, a star that blew up and created molecules and atoms and different elements on the periodic table and whatnot. We're okay with that. But the idea that we would then bear some kind of influence or connection with the other things in the cosmos, also operating under a complex web of cause and effect, the likes of which are so intricate and nuanced no one will ever fully comprehend with a human consciousness. That idea, though, that's stupid. But the stock market makes total sense. Like just like how rich people feel on a given day with their insider trading, making false senses of scarcity, like that's the real thing. Anyway, sorry, whatever. And it's like, and the stock market is a complex web of symbols that we've conjured that also affect the lived experience of people. But in my opinion, that's a really shitty one. And we have this wonderful, beautiful web of cosmic unification where everything is affected by the same laws and spirit governing all of universal conscious awareness. And like, it's amazing and it's beautiful and it connects us with everything around us and it makes everything important and also nothing important and also everything real and also nothing real all at the same time. So much wonder and mystery, but that's the one that we think is stupid. Like, I don't know, whatever. And that's also like, okay, so astrology has moon signs and sun signs, and we know, right? We see that animals in our experience have adapted, have co-evolved within this complex system to, for example, lay their eggs under certain shores during certain seasons, which is created by the way the sun and the earth, rotate each other and all that. The seasons, under certain lunar cycles, they are obviously influenced by the turning of the moon and the turning of the sun and all of those two bodies alone, which are accounted for in astrology, have real effects, or at least correspond, because this is the other thing. Astrology is divided on if it's causal or just correspondence, but at the very least we can say it corresponds to certain celestial patterns, and we see that. We can see that in the world, right? Moonflowers open up for the moon and sunflowers open up for the sun, and we see that. They're influenced by the planets because we are evolved with those systems already in place, right? Because the seasons created us. Because the way that the sun and the moon and the earth interact created how we live, who we are, what we do. The fact that we are our biorhythms, right? We evolved with this system already in place. Anyway, I was like, the fact that, like, okay, so 2,000 years ago, people were calling Jupiter the greater benefic, saying it did things like protected and blessed and granted luck and all this. And then we discover, oh, Jupiter's gravity protects the Earth from solar flares and other malicious things, which is what Jupiter in a chart does in astrology. It protects people, it blesses people, uplifts people, right? And like, whatever, man. Like, just because you don't know why doesn't mean it isn't true, which is the heart of science, right? It's like, hey, I'm going to keep an open mind and experiment and gather data and actually see if there's something to this. And yet you get a certain type of person, not everybody, and not all logical people, and not all scientists, and not even all neckbeards on the internet, but you get a certain type of person who is immediately dismissive because of what they think they know reality is made up of. And it's just wild to me. It's just like insane to me. Honestly, it is. And they do it because they think they read a zodiac column once in a magazine and they're like, oh, my sun sign is completely inaccurate. I was like, okay, have you checked out your moon sign and your Venus sign and your Mercury sign and your Saturn and your Jupiter and the aspects between them and the house systems and your perfection year? Like, they don't know fucking shit. Like, how can you dismiss a system when you know, literally that's like saying the alphabet doesn't work because you know the letter A and it doesn't sound like the first letter of your name. Like, whatever, man. Like, come on. I mean, it's an entire complex web. It's one of the first systems of data. It's one of the first points of data collection that humanity has ever made. Like, every human culture, civilization that we know of, for as far back as we know anything about anyone, has looked at the sky and seen correspondences between celestial patterns and terrestrial patterns. That's existed everywhere. And Hellenistic astrology is wonderful because the way that it's traveled is very much unchanged from how we practice Hellenistic astrology today. And so people have had 2,000 years to build this system and it's still around. And that alone should speak to something, you know? It's older. Like there's okay, so in the Renaissance, right? William Lilly makes a book called Christian Astrology. And it's Hellenistic astrology. He's just trying to sell it to Christians. He's trying to say, "Hey guys, there's something to this, right?" It's not like Christian astrology. It's just astrology. It's normal astrology. But what I'm trying to say is that astrology transgresses, transpasses, I don't know, transcends, I think is the word I'm looking for. Astrology transcends religious systems, right? It comes before Christianity. It comes before most pagan cultures we know of. Like the ancient Egyptians got their astrology from the Babylonians. The ancient Greeks borrowed their astrology from the ancient Egyptians. You know, the Renaissance Europeans got their astrology from the ancient Greeks. Like it's passed down through hands across culture, across time and space, and it's still almost it's been added to, it's been refined, but it's very much similar to what it always has been as far back as we know of what it was. And it's like still accurate. Like you can find delineations for certain planetary aspects in your natal chart written 3,000 or not 3,000, but like written forever ago, you know, written in the Renaissance, written in Hellenistic Greece. And it's still accurate to what you're experiencing today, right? Because it's a giant clock. Anyway, and you know, like they say, history doesn't repeat, but it rhymes. Right? It's like that. Anyway, sorry. That was a annoying tangent, but I just was like having this conversation with somebody, and it's so sad because I was also raised like that. Like I was raised to be dismissive and to be like, that's not real though. That's all baloney. That's all just made up because people are afraid that all that happens is you're born and then you die and that's it. Like, but that's not it actually. And so, you know, the Eight of Cups can be a very nice little segue into that experience when you're like, oh, there's actually so much more about reality than I thought. Like it's so much bigger and grander and somehow more inclusive than I ever would have believed, right? Because of false idols, false structures, societal norms, whatever, you know, it's more than you think. And that can be very uplifting and it can also be very overwhelming and scary. And it kind of depends on the situation. So, but as I'm saying, you know, we get this Fool card. So it's the leap of faith. Like for me, thinking, oh, maybe there's something to this astrology stuff. Like for me, that was a big leap of faith because I struggle with faith. As a Capricorn rising, the 9th house, which is all about faith and religion and philosophy and spiritual belief, is ruled by is Virgo. And Virgo is ruled by Mercury. And Mercury wants receipts and data, please and thanks. Like, you know, Mercury, and especially the Virgo expression of Mercury, wants to make sense, make logic, make patterns, make math, right? It wants to be make a list and then check it off, right? It wants to experiment and observe before it makes any kind of claim. And my Jupiter is in that Virgo 9th house. So for me, belief is something that had to be systematically experimented with and observed and played around with. Like I couldn't just take it on face value. So and I think, you know, it depends on how everybody has a different chart, obviously. Everyone has a different life, a different experience. For some people, faith is given to them by their, you know, by their parents or their grandparents or their society or whatever. But for me, I had no faith given to me, right? Which is, again, Jupiter's in fall in Virgo in my chart. And it's ruled by Mercury. And then, you know what they say is that if Mercury rules your 9th house or is in your 9th house, that you're an atheist or that you're more likely to be an atheist or not have a faith or not believe in God. And this is, you know, Jupiter is like the planet of spirituality, the planet of God, of religion. You know, it oftentimes coincides with these kinds of meanings. So for me to have Jupiter in the 9th house that's ruled by Mercury was very much like faith was not given to me. I had to calculate faith, right? I had to figure it out. I had to do the math, so to speak. I mean, I'm not good at math because again, my Mercury is peregrine, but it was a process. You know, and Virgo is all about systems and processing and all that. It took me a long time to have the amount of data that I felt secure saying like, oh, I do believe. Right? I have to have a certain amount of evidence before I can say that. And all I can say is, you know, I can't tell you why. I can't tell you why it works necessarily, but it does. And I've seen it. I've seen it enough to believe it, right? Which I think it goes to that expression of that chart configuration. So, yeah. taking a leap of faith into spirituality with some, with some guidance and with some tweaks. And again, like I didn't abandon logic, okay? I didn't. So, it's both. I just realized there was more. There was more than just cold hard facts and perceivable reality. There is a surface and there is in fact something beneath it. So for me, coming into a spiritual kind of mindset was very much a matter of adjustment. It was a matter of both. It was, you can logically evaluate something and really think it through and look for facts and look for evidence and explore the history and excavate the context of where these beliefs arise and be critical and be skeptical and still believe that there's more than we will ever truly know, right? You can be logical and you can be spiritual. You don't have to pick. They can inform each other. They can help each other, and in the meantime, you just have to take that leap of faith, right? You have to go with it. You have to at least get, and this is another thing too with the Fool and with what I've been talking about, like you have to at least give yourself the grace to experiment with the possibility that it could be different than what you believe. Maybe you don't fully believe it. I definitely had my transitionary period where I was like, oh, it's just fun. I'm just sure for fun. It's just fun to read horoscopes. It's just fun. And then I was like, no, it's real. You know what I mean? Like after quite a few, like observing my own transits, observing progressive, what am I trying to say? Observing different timing techniques that you can use in astrology and after experimenting with tarot, right? Like when I was first working on the Children of Litha, I was at a point where I wanted desperately to believe, but I was also very, very hesitant, and I didn't want to believe something only because I wanted to believe. I wanted facts. I wanted experience. I wanted some kind of proof. And faith and proof don't really go together. And so that was and so I was very, and again, like with my background, my parents were very not spiritual. They were very not anything intangible. They're both earth signs and they're both very earth heavy in their chart, and they don't tend to address things that are more than perceived reality, like at all. If you feel bad, oh well, tough it up, get good, I guess. That's honestly like my mom's catchphrase is like, that's life. You have an emotional problem, a psychic problem, and it's like, well, fuck off, tough luck. And I don't want to say that like she was never nurturing, she was, and she tried, but it's not something that was like pervasive in my family. It's not something that was just given. Like we didn't have a faith, right? We didn't have an emotional threshold, even, I would say. My parents tried the best. Obviously they loved me and, they helped me when they could, but they also didn't have that vocabulary necessarily given to them either. So it was just one of the spots in my personal background that was a little bit lacking. And when I first came out and I told everyone that I was going to make a tarot deck, I would always say, I love the art. I love the symbolism. You look at it and it's like a Rorschach test, you see what you need to see and you can kind of workshop your feelings, your instincts and all that. And that is all true. That's 100% true about tarot. But then as I was working with it more and more, I was like if you get people who are really into tarot, who've been doing it for a while, they'll tell you things like the deck has a energy, has a spirit, has an essence. There's some kind of thing, an intelligence behind it. And it's not just necessarily your own higher intelligence projecting something you need to see through the subconsciousness, although definitely, yes, I do believe that is a part of it. So I'm not saying it's not. But there's more. There's just more. There's some unseen element that at the end of the day, you just have to have faith in. And the faith is not, it doesn't have to be, well, you can't necessarily prove faith. That's the opposite of the thing we're going for. There is a certain amount of like experience, right? You just say, oh, I've seen it work. I don't know why. I don't know how, but I believe. Right? That's kind of, for me, that was my personal segue into like, for me, that's what faith is. It's not taking something blind. It's experimenting and observing and saying like, well, I don't have all the pieces, but I have enough to know that this is what I believe now. Right? Until I come up with something better, this is what I got. And again, I think Virgo, 9th house, Jupiter combo, I think that's kind of what that gives you. And my Venus is also conjunct my Jupiter, where she's also in fall, so they're not greatly aspected planets. Which, by the way, I just want to talk about this for a minute, because I know that sometimes it scares people. If you have a planet that is like in fall or is in detriment or exile, it's not well aspected in a chart, that does not mean you don't get what that planet has to offer. My Venus is in fall. Fall is considered not good. Venus is about, beauty and art and I'm still an artist. And Venus is my out of sect benefic, so by rights, it shouldn't even be that relevant to my life. But it's also ruling my 10th house, and it definitely is, right? And it also, Venus, my Venus anyways, it has triplicity bound and face dignity at least, so it does have something going on, but it's my Jupiter that's really struggling, and Venus, despite being in a position of fall in my chart, still helped my Jupiter to believe, because it was beautiful, right? Because these philosophies are beautiful, because they're beautiful and they connect us, and they're intricate and they're meaningful, and they come from somewhere. They come from a human experience that goes beyond race, age, culture, whatever, beyond everything, because at the end of the day, like, we are humans, right? We are the human race. And these philosophies, these beliefs and cultures, the artwork that they produce, that speaks to something that is a shared human resource, that is it's ancestral inheritance, right? Is these amazing beliefs and philosophies, and they're beautiful. And so that Venus, despite being, only a slightly better, a little bit better off than the Jupiter, anyway, this is just to say, there's a lot going on in a chart. If you have one planet that's not doing super well, that doesn't mean you don't get the thing. It just means maybe you work harder for it. Maybe it doesn't come naturally to you. Maybe somebody else brings it to you in your life. Maybe you're not Jupiter. Maybe Jupiter is your teacher that helps you through your life, right? If Jupiter shows up in your 7th house, maybe it's like, you still have a philosophy and a belief, but you see it really strongly in what other people bring to your life, because 7th house is like partnerships. Anyway, my point is, don't panic. If you do an astrology reading and you have a chart and you see something that you're like, oh, this is apparently very bad, like, it's still you. Everything you see in an astrology chart, and to a certain extent in a tarot reading, like, it's you, it's life, and mostly life goes on, and mostly life can be beautiful and full of wonder, and sometimes there are hard parts and there are struggles, and astrology and tarot both definitely speak to those. But it's not like the end of it. It's not the end of it. We all have a full deck of cards. We all have a full chart of planets, and they're all doing things to make a wonderful, beautiful, alchemic concoction that is us and our experience. And sometimes that experience is full of dangers and pitfalls and trials and lessons, but sometimes it's full of just really beautiful, wonderful things. And we tend not to talk about those as much. Anyway, so that is my rant about that. If I was getting these cards in a reading, that's what I would say. I'll do one other thing for the collective really quick before I go, just like a general, heads up. What do you need to know? Oh, by the way, let me read some comments before I say this. So let's see, 36 Faces is so rare. I've been looking. Oh, I know. Yeah. And yep, 36 Secrets. Thank you for checking for me. That is the book that Susan T. Chang wrote, 36 Secrets. Very good. That's 2 of the cards I found difficult to decide between in my Ostara Litho combo deck. They're beautiful. Oh, yes. Thank you so much. Let's see. It's so funny. Oh, look, we got a whole little group chat going. That's so awesome. I love it. Cool. Okay. All right. So, and then one other thing, I wanted to use both decks. So this is Ostara. This is Litha. As you may have noticed, they have the same card backs, but they have entirely different card fronts. And the idea is that you can kind of mix and match or pull out cards and use the ones that you like if you want. So I've created all of these tarot decks myself. I also, and you never know who's watching, so I suppose I should specify. You can get them at xiahunt.com. I am the writer, creator, illustrator, researcher, everything behind almost all of my products, but definitely my tarot decks. And my tarot decks, mats, keychains, I have sigil keychains, all kinds of stuff. Anyway, you can get them at xiahunt.com. These tarot decks are part of a series I'm working on called The Wheel, or the Children of the Wheel. And they're going to be 8 decks in total, 4 tarot decks and 4 oracle decks. And they're all going to have totally different cards on the front, totally different depictions of the cards. I'll pull up I already shuffled. That's funny. Okay, here we go. I already shuffled it just a bit. So, like I was saying, this is 8 of Cups in Litha, 8 of Cups in Ostara. Ostara focuses on the human relationship between plants and humans, and Litha focuses on animals and humans. And so together, they have the same It's a nature, right? It's different types of nature. So all of the Children of the Wheel series are going to have different backs so that you could mix and match. So that if you really didn't like this tarot card of the Eight of Cups for some reason and you really liked the jellyfish from Litha, you could just put it in your deck and you wouldn't know. So yeah, so that's what that's for. So I'm going to do one reading for the collective. Now would be a time where if you want this to be for you, you should project your thoughts into the virtual space. And we'll do something. I'm going to pull one card from Litha, and I'm going to pull one card from Ostara. And I'm going to do a thing I don't usually do, but I'm going to say that Ostara is going to be our external experience, and Litha is going to be our internal experience. And so we're going to have an interesting kind of like what it looks like and what it feels like. So this is going to be what it feels like. What we got feeling-wise going on. What's going on? Oh, okay. Interesting. Okay, nice. Okay, so we have the Three of Pentacles and the Two of Swords. The Three of Pentacles is reversed. The Two of Swords is upright. For those of you curious, this is the Mars-ruled decan of Capricorn. And where, by the way, Mars is exalted in Capricorn, but it's reversed, so. And then this is the Two of Swords is the Moon-ruled decan of Libra. For those interested. So I'm going to get to it in a second, but this is our internal experience of the situation. Let's pull up the external experience. Okay. All right. So let's see how we can put these on the screen so that they appear nicely. Okay, here we go. All right, let me drink some coffee and then we'll get to it. And I'm not going to go through more astrological stuff than necessary. I'm just going to read the cards for you because, again, this is kind of the last little bit for the collective before I take off. But so here we go. So our internal experience, collaboration is failing. Not everybody is pulling their weight. It's very frustrating. We might be at a standstill, especially if we're working on collaborative projects or commissions, employment, being hired in a job situation. The Three of Pentacles pretty much always represents a situation where we're working with other people to accomplish a goal that is greater than what we could accomplish alone. When it's upright, there is a hierarchy, it's clear and effective, and we're able to contribute the best that we have to the purposes of the whole, and things are going really smoothly. When it's reversed, that's not the case. Somebody's not pulling their weight, there's miscommunications, there's maybe a battle for like dominance or hierarchy, and that's creating, dissonance in the ranks. I don't know if you guys have ever watched Hell's Kitchen, but Gordon Ramsay, he's really big on enforcing hierarchy in the kitchen. He can say anything he wants to you, and you just have to say, yes, chef. And if you argue, it's like a throwdown, right? It's like, get out, lots of yelling, screaming, very Mars. I really want to talk about Gordon Ramsay's astrology, but I shall refrain. Okay, so anyway, the point is, there are situations where hierarchy absolutely is beneficial and needs to be enforced and respected in order for the machine to keep running. This is reversed, so it's not working very well, right? There's something, our leaders are inept. The boss is wrong. There's a vying for power, or there's just laziness, or there's insubordination, or there's miscommunication, whatever it is. In our collaborative group life projects, it's not working out so well. I would say if we're pulling for the collective and you're in America, this does definitely speak to the state of things, just generally. And also hierarchy is not serving the purpose of the collective. This is another thing, right? We build structures to support civilization. When our structures do not support civilization, which is to say, do not support the people within that society, that is speaking to a failure of the structure and those who enforce it, i.e. the rulers, the people in charge. Stuff is not working. And here's the deal. When you are the ruler, when you are responsible for the thing and you get all the benefits and perks, you also get the downfall. When stuff doesn't work, it's your fault. It doesn't matter if so-and-so didn't show up on time and, this guy messed up on this part of the job or whatever. If you are the one in charge, you are responsible for getting your team to work. It reflects poorly on on you. And so in the same way, you know, when the system fails, our leaders are failing us, right? The system is failing us. If it's not helpful, if it doesn't get the results we need, if it's not conducive to life, if it's not sustainable, right? There's some kind of wrench in the system. It's not going well. If the system doesn't support us, why are we in it? Why do we do it? You know, why do we choose to support it? So these are questions you ask yourself, whether this is a big system or a small system, whether this is your collab project with your bandmates, and you're trying to make a band, but everybody wants to be the lead singer, or, you know, you're off trying to, start up your business with your best friends or whatever, or you're, you know, at Starbucks and your manager is an idiot, right? Like something isn't working. It could be you, could be your manager, could be whoever, but the collaboration is what's failing, right? The totality of it is not working, and ultimately the leader will bear responsibility for that. So figure out who's supposed to be in charge and hold them accountable, right? Whether that's you holding yourself accountable or otherwise, right? That needs to be sorted out. Mars in Capricorn, which is the decan that this card corresponds to, absolutely speaks to hierarchy and keeping people in line. But it goes both ways. You know, if your leader isn't leading well, you need a new leader. If you are the leader and you're not, and things aren't going well, it's your fault. You are the leader. You have to figure it out. It's absolutely about taking accountability and taking action to rectify it when stuff happens. Now, could just be disagreement, but here's the deal. It's because of indecision. There's a lot of things that should be said but are not being said because it would upset social norms or customs. There's a lot of tiptoeing around things. There's a lot of hiding or concealing things for the preservation of a so-called harmony or peace that, while totally possibly corruptive or corrosive or not good, right, is still intimidating, right? It's intimidating. You don't necessarily want to go left. You don't necessarily want to go right. You don't necessarily want to tell boss he's wrong. You don't really want to tell him he's right either. The moon is about is about comfort and fulfilling emotional and physical needs. Thirst, hunger, love, respect, right? The moon is about the fulfilling of what we need and the nurturing and the comforting, the support, what's vulnerable, what needs to be protected, that sort of thing. And so in Libra, which is diplomatic, ruled by Venus, wants things to be harmonized and get along, but also in Libra is about justice, right? Social justice and otherwise. I mean, I would argue there really isn't any other kind of justice except for social justice, because justice is social. It is literally morality as dictated by the social customs of your culture. Anyway, whatever. So the point is, though, we get into these situations very often when we know that something isn't right, but we don't necessarily want to rock the boat because that seems like it would make things worse, or it's not the right time, or we're not sure how to go about it. Either way, it seems kind of iffy or kind of dicey. So I like to say with the Two of Swords, it's like, and again, swords are mental, they're air. And so it's intellectual, it's about communication, it's about thinking, problem solving. And in Libra, it's social because it's ruled by Venus. And with the moon, it's about comfort, social comforts, right? Intellectually navigating social comforts to preserve harmony. What this looks like in practice is like you're at a party and your friend makes an off-color joke and you don't think it hit well and you don't know if you should say something and risk a confrontation with your friend or if you should just let it slide because it's not that big a deal, right? Sometimes it's a big deal, sometimes it's not. And so the Two of Swords often represents figuring out, like, is this a true transgression of justice that needs to be rectified and adjusted, or is this something we can look the other way and have things go along just as well, right? Because ultimately we want to maintain harmony. But what that means is that everyone is doing pretty good, right? Is that nobody's egregiously suffering, nobody is egregiously exploited, manipulated, taken advantage of. Yeah, maybe there's compromise here and there, and okay, maybe not everybody wins all the time, but generally speaking, things are fair and good, and so we can kind of overlook the occasional time when it's not, right? Because no system is ever perfect. However, sometimes that is not the case. Sometimes things are egregious and bad and not good, and something should be said. So it's very interesting, said and done. But anyway, it's very interesting because we have this reverse card and we have this upright card. And in this case, the upright is still speaking to discomfort and not knowing how to act. It can also be kind of this it's not exactly the same as paralysis by analysis, but it's like because you don't really want to go left and you don't really want to go right, you're not really making a decision one way or the other, and not acting is also a choice, right? It also has consequence. It is essentially an action. So choosing not to do anything is not inherently better or worse than choosing to act. It really depends on circumstance. But in this case, the feeling is something is out of whack and we have to figure out how we should address that. Now, the external situation is very much collaborating this. We have a reversed, a Seven of Swords. So this is going to be, secrecy, stealth, figuring out how to get away with stuff. When it's upright, generally, and it depends on the deck, it depends on what's going around, but generally speaking, there's a time to be subtle, right? There's a time when you need to be subtle, you need to be nuanced, you need to skirt around issues to preserve your own health or the betterment, the better cause, right? You need to kind of sniff the wind and figure out how things are going to work. But when it's reversed, this is duplicitous behavior. This is like trying to get away with something. You know things aren't right, you feel it's not right, someone's trying to get away with something, and what we're doing is enduring, trying to wait it out, trying to figure out, okay, if we're going to run, if we're going to not stay in this environment, in this situation where we're feeling like things aren't collaborative, things aren't working well, we don't yet know how we're going to address the issue or where we're going to go if not here, but we know that it's not working and we know that we're being taken advantage of. So we've sniffed the wind. It's not good. We're going to leave. Then when we get to the Nine of Wands, the moon's decan of Sagittarius, this is like, okay, first of all, the moon, what's vulnerable? What needs to be protected and nurtured? Sagittarius, as ruled by Jupiter, wants to protect all of the people, wants to champion all of the causes. It considers everything equal. But when we are in the moon's decan of Sagittarius, the moon wants us to consider what is actually most vulnerable and needs the most help, the most protection. If we can only take one thing or person, idea, whatever, if we can only have one, what is the one worth saving, protecting, taking, nurturing? Now, the nines are very experienced. They have a lot of momentum. Things are basically manifest. So we're saying, okay, this is the reality. I've experienced these kinds of things before. I know I can only get this one really important thing. What is it? And the nine is about figuring that out. It's about enduring. It's about protecting, making sure to keep what is important and what is true to you, both spiritually, morally, and also literally, physically, like if the house is burning down, what do you take out of the house first? Obviously, for me, it's my children, right? Children first, dog second, and then maybe we start getting into the finer things. But if you can really only save a couple things, right? What is the most valuable? What is the most vulnerable? Anyway, so that's my reading for the collective. It's like, there's power struggles, there's indecision and injustice. Somebody's definitely trying to get away with something, and we need to start figuring out, okay, if the ship goes down, what's important? And I'm not saying like big cataclysmic things. I don't want to be doom and gloom. I don't know the specifics of things, but this is the feeling and this is what it looks like. And yeah, sacrifices will probably be made, right? And this is true on every scale. Like if we're thinking about moving and changing jobs, right? We think, okay, what is the one thing that's important? Like, is it health benefits? Is it salary? Is it my relationships to my coworkers? Like if I have to leave my job because this isn't a good situation, where am I going to go? What's important? What should I try to keep? And is it worth enduring and sticking out? Like these are the kinds of questions you should ask yourself, because right now, externally, you're just kind of bracing, right? Everybody's just kind of, the environment is such like, okay, well, we're still going. It's kind of like that meme, the end of the world might happen tomorrow, but I still got to pay my bills today. It's like, we got to figure out like, okay, right now things are bracing. We're waiting for impact. We're figuring out what is the damage. How are things actually going to go? But we do know there is duplicity going on. There is suspicion. There are lies, treacheries, corruptions, particularly those in charge. There's power battles, and we're just here kind of sniffing the wind and feeling like, how is this going to go? It's quite a cliffhanger spread, actually. It's quite like, I don't know how it's going to go. So that's really interesting. But the bottom of the deck for Litha is this really nice, like, oh, we're bracing for a fight, ego battle, right? So that's fun. This nice little five of wands over here. And Ostara, we have the Six of Cups, right? Which really speaks to like nurtured values, childhood and children, right? This is figuring out like, oh, and also reciprocity. This is the sun's decan of Scorpio, by the way. I don't want to get super into it because we're really short on time and my phone's about to die, but basically this is like what you put into your cup, you get, or what you give out, you get in, right? What you put in, you take out, that kind of thing. And this is a pattern that is both personal and also collective. So what your parents pass on to you is what was put into their cup. What you pass on to your kids is what was put into your cup, right? And what they pass on to their kids is what was put into their cup, and so on and so forth. And until you actually look at the cup you're holding and figure out if that's something you want to pass down the line or not, that's going to continue to be the pattern. And that's true every day. It's true every lifetime. It's true every culture, right? You have to figure out, you have to really reckon what's in this cup and do I want it or do I want something else? And these different patterns are what ultimately build our instincts. They're informed by our childhood experiences. And some of those childhood experiences produce maladaptive coping mechanisms that need to be readdressed. Some of them produce, fond memories and happy times that we want to relive and have to be careful not to get stuck in, right? So this is why the Six of Cups is about nostalgia, yes, but it's also about what builds that nostalgia. What is your nostalgia built out of? What are the assumptions, the preconceived notions? What was a narrative you were told is supposed to work for you? And does it really? And do you want to continue it? So that's my reading for that. And I hope you guys have an awesome day, month, year, whatever. Again, I know, sorry, shameless plug, but my website is xiahunt.com. I have a Patreon. I have an Instagram. I have this YouTube. Please like and subscribe if you get any value out of this. I really appreciate it. And of course, you can find all of the products here today, including this cool divination mat and these cool divination coins on my website, xiahunt.com. And I would just be so thrilled and honored if you choose to support and patron my craft, but no pressure. So anyway, I don't like doing that. I like making the art, but I really don't like selling it, but such is life, right? Anyway, so yeah, I hope to see you guys again next Wednesday. I try to do these little tarot lives every Wednesday at 9:30 in the AM, in the morning. I think AM's morning, right? In the morning, Pacific time. So I hope to see you again next week. Bye-bye.